OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
Yeah, 7:30 on this Thursday morning. You're welcome along to OTB AM. It's Owen and Ger with you right the way through until 10 o'clock this morning. And we've got plenty coming up. We've got an interview with Aidan O'Mahony, who I was chatting to earlier this week. Graham Hunter has the latest from Catalonia and Madrid. Mike Carlson will be talking us through a brand new NFL season, which starts tonight. And we've got the overall winner of last year's Fantasy Premier League with us later on as well. It's Oxford mathematician Joshua Bull. If you've got any questions for any of them, you can tweet us at Off The Ball. You can comment on the stream below. We're going to be going through the sports pages as well later on. Plenty on Sam Bennett, plenty on the beef that seems to be brewing between Jurgen Klopp and Frank Lampard. Before all of that, though, here's Brian O'Driscoll from last night's show.
All right, welcome along to Wednesday Night Rugby. Pretty interesting point of the season that we've reached, and lots to get into in the company of Brian O'Driscoll, as you heard their rugby coverage with thanks to Vodafone. Team of us, everyone in. Brian O'Driscoll, are you in?
I'm all in. I'm all in.
We've lots to get into. It's been such a mad season, such an interesting time, and lots of interesting stuff to get into. First of all, I need to ask you about, we had your former colleague on at the top of the show last night. He's obviously hobnobbing it down the south of France, winging it down to the after party he was last night after Sam Bennett's stage win at the Tour de France, and he's gone close again today in the last little while, gone very close to the first Irish rider ever to win back-to-back stages at the Tour de France, but photo finish narrowly edged him out. But is that anything you pay any heed to, the flag been flown in such a significant way in cycling of all sports?
I wouldn't have been apparent, to his success other than, seeing it on the news last night and then looking at the interviews and seeing the elation and the outpouring of support for him, how people were so thrilled for him. It was such a raw interview on Eurosport that, you had to kind of really feel huge excitement for him, because he really couldn't believe it. What I can believe is Rog hobnobbing something and jumping on the bandwagon of a guy he barely knows. Success is something that he's subsequently been renowned for in his retirement.
Yeah, and made no bones about it either. To be fair to him, he was full on. We'll keep a track of that on both Rog and Sam Bennett as the next few weeks unfold and see exactly what's going on. The news obviously filtered through late last night for Owen Farrell. Brian, 5 weeks, about right?
I don't know about that. It was a bad one, as they said. 10 weeks ban, the higher end of the scale. So, I don't know what about the good behaviour. I'm all for first suspension or first time being red carded, that people should look at it a bit more leniently. But he has previous. He was banned 4.5 years ago, and I don't think that's a long enough period to wipe the slate clean and give him another 50% off. So I think he's a very lucky boy. I wouldn't subscribe to the vitriol on social media about how appallingly dirty a player Owen Farrell is. I'm a huge Owen Farrell fan. I think he plays on the edge. He gets it wrong sometimes, and he's been very lucky. But he's the sort of guy that you would really love to have in your team, because he throws himself into every single collision, whether it's legal or not. He doesn't shirk any responsibilities on the defensive side of his game. And as a teammate, you would respect someone like that, particularly in the number 10 position. But on this occasion, I think he's very, very lucky to only get 5 matches. He is going to miss the quarterfinal in Europe, but in the circumstance where Saracens managed to navigate their way through to a semi-final and potentially on to a final, he would be available for that. So I don't know. I'm mixed emotions, because I don't think you should throw the guy under the bus completely, but I think he's gotten off quite lightly on this one.
So the process of it, so like you say, you got 10 weeks and it's cut in 2 because the coaches, shockingly, the coaches for his club and country come in and say he's a great guy. And rather bizarrely in my book, a charity, the founders of a charity that's involved with have come in and said, like, look at all this charity going on over here. I don't know, slightly odd to me that, I'm sorry, I nearly took this guy's head off, but look at all this charity work I do. It's an unusual scenario, isn't it? The whole references, the testimonial thing, when it's so blatant that it has absolutely nothing to do with his on-field stuff.
Yeah, I suppose be careful not to throw stones in glass houses. You know, I've been involved in circumstances like this, both as sitting on the naughty step, but also as one of those people speaking on behalf of other players. And of course, you're going to try and put your best foot forward, try and pitch yourself or that individual as someone that's held highly in society, that does good work, that, you know, this is an aberration on their, you know, usual form. So you do anything to try and reduce those numbers. That's sport, that's life. And I'm not surprised to see the people coming in for him. I saw Paul Williams, the journalist over in Wales, asking whether, you know, charity work and that sort of thing makes any difference. And I saw a lawyer come on and respond to him. And he said, good character, generally no convictions, is a mitigating factor. Positive good character, acts of particular morale with causing societal benefit can attract further discounts. So it works. It works. So it's not going to work against you. It's going to work for you. And in this case, it appears to have had a positive effect. 2013,
is that what you were talking about?
Well, like, listen, there's a multi. What's that?
2013, your naughty step appearance.
Yeah, and do you know what? I should have been red carded for it. I was lucky when the you know, the card was pulled out. Wayne Barnes was referee, and he, you know, spoke to his touch judge, and I was sure it was going to be a red card. And to be honest with you, it probably warranted a red card. I got frustrated. They were killing ball all afternoon, and I took it into my own hands, and I stood on the back of I think it was at Mazzi back in their full back. Now, he kind of let out a shriek similar to the ball lady over in the US Open when Novak Djokovic hit her. So it probably brought, you know, to the referee's attention all the more. But that said, I should have been sent off. I ended up getting 4 weeks reduced by 50% to 2. I think you've got to look at the circumstances individually. I think provided it's unintentional or you don't cause major injury to anyone, I think you have to bring in the circumstances where it is potentially out of character. And I think that 50% should be considered. I think thereafter, you know, if you're on a second, third, fourth ban, it's got to be 100% of whatever the initial ban is. And, you know, irrespective of time passing and lots of good behaviour, I still think second time penalised, I wouldn't say you throw the book at them, but I think you get the full whack.
Yeah, I think, well, in your case, it was like 2 sin bins in a 15-year career, Brian, something along those lines. So that was to your favour.
At the same time, and I definitely paid on the edge, and, you know, I gave as good as I got, but I would have liked to have thought that I wasn't dirty, that I was physical. And yes, I probably got away with 1 or 2 other things where it might have been extreme, particularly when rooking was rooking. You know, there was a fine line between, you know, standing on people when they were in the vicinity of the ball, but that's the way the game was. It shifted dramatically since then, and I got my just reward or just desserts in 2013 when I got a yellow card, but ultimately should have been red carded. So we're trying to clean the game up, and for obvious reasons. And Owen Farrell, I saw a montage of some, you know, big collisions and some borderline shots, and, you know, I'm not surprised that he has a reputation in the public domain about this, because he does play right on the edge. And if you're gonna play like that, you're gonna miss one every so often. And he missed big at the weekend. And I do think he's gotten off likely with 5 games.
Yeah, well, we might loop back to the Champions Cup before we wrap up, but I do want to talk a little bit about the Pro 14 and the point of the season we're at there, and obviously this all Irish final to look ahead to now as well. Just on Ulster, maybe first to begin with, Brian, do you buy the idea that the Edinburgh game was like a turning point now for Ulster, that they've proven here that they've got bottle, and it's games like that can turn the culture of a team? Like, there's obviously been a lot made about the nature of it, that the fact that the game was getting away from them, that maybe in some regards had totally got away from them. And obviously Ian Madigan's been rightly praised, but that this is a pivotal point now in the culture and the future of that Ulster group, or just a one-off?
Well, it just depends on how they kick on from it, doesn't it? I think it can stand as something major if they're able to, you know, garner confidence from it and go and put in a huge performance this weekend. And and from their perspective, potentially go and win the Pro 14. Is it possible that they could do that? 100%. It's a final. We've seen Leinster, fall into major underdogs in Connacht when it was 2014, 2015. So it wouldn't be the biggest shock of all time. But on the form book, looking at the performances of Leinster in these last 3 games versus Ulster, I could understand why they'd be major favourites. Ulster, they weren't terrible in the first half. What really hurt them against Edinburgh was that last ball, when they go through 8, 9, 10 phases and then, a bad pass at scrum half, or, confusion as to who the next ball carrier is and 2 guys leave it and it's a silly knock on. Those things really hurt them. And, couple that with then going down, locking down for a scrum and giving away a penalty straight away. That's all momentum and territory lost from a concerted period of pressure being put on the opposition. Those things absolutely deflate you. They take the wind out of your sails, and it's difficult to come back from that. And it was only 5-0 at half time, and they hadn't done a huge amount wrong, albeit Edinburgh probably could have scored another try or 2 because Ulster got a little bit narrow. But when they played with the invention they did, when they were, whatever was it, I'm not sure, 20 minutes ago, was it 15 points down? Not quite, but somewhere in that vicinity.
Close, yeah.
They played with an ambition and a freedom that you want them to start with, and a cohesion, and just becoming collision winners, and not willing to settle for being taken down in tackles, but driving for an extra 1 or 2 meters. And the knock-on effect to the next phase is the defensive line is on their heels rather than their toes. And all those little moments add up to the successes of putting yourself in a position to win the game, irrespective of Ian Madigan's heroics at the end. I think the heroics of the game, the game was won and lost on Billy Byrne's intercept when they were going to go 3 scores down in early in that second half. Him getting back and intercepting that and ultimately keeping Ulster in the game was the difference between them playing this weekend and being on their holidays.
And looking at the weekend on the Leinster side, like I noted with interest today, and I have to say, I'll tell you my immediate reaction to it now. And I heard that there's been talk of resting Johnny Sexton. Like, there might be something else going on in the background, who knows? But certainly the outward talk is that he's going to be rested, potentially for this weekend, with one eye obviously on the championship quarters. And regardless, in some ways, of the quality coming in behind him, Brian, like my first thought was that there's a touch of arrogance almost about it on the Leinster side, that we can win this game without him.
Yeah, I suppose if you're Ulster and you were looking at it, you would definitely see it as that. I would if I was opposition and you were looking at resting one of your major players for a final. I don't know whether there's any truth in that, to be honest with you. I didn't text Johnny myself, but I tried to inquire and didn't hear anything back. So whether there's any truth in rumours, we'll have to wait for the team announcements. But I think there is a huge amount of focus and trust being put into the other players, into the Byrne brothers, into Kieran Frawley. And I don't think Leo's and Stuart Lancaster are just paying lip service to trying to keep everyone on side. I do believe that they genuinely feel that they can put guys into pivot roles, into key roles, and still get a huge performance from the team. It's not going to be the same side without Johnny Sexton, but fairness to Ross Byrne, anytime he's come in for big games, he's been calm, collected, and he's been able to deliver, as he did in the semi-final against Munster last year, and a few other times in Europe, away in France. He was still able to churn out a good performance. I think it doesn't shock me to hear that, because I do think that their focus definitely is about Saracens and about trying to get that 5th European title.
Yeah. We got to look at Harry Byrne, obviously, a couple of weeks ago. I don't know what it is with Leinster and Byrne brothers, but they seem to be knocking them off the conveyor belt one way or the other. Who's the better out half, from what you know? Him or
I think Harry is, personally. I think he offers more. I think he's he is a bit more aggressive, taking the ball to the line. I think he's got bundles of confidence. I'm not saying his brother doesn't, but I think he's absolutely oozing with confidence, bordering on that cocky sort of player that you want your 10 to be. And he's someone that I think you would really love to play outside, because he sticks defenders down on the inside and still knows how to throw the right pass. I think I think Ross is a bit more of a cog in the wheel rather than kind of an X factor player himself. I think he facilitates others to get more out of themselves, whereas I think Harry Byrne wants to be a star player himself, and that creates more space for other players naturally by him being so aggressive too, but also having the brain capacity to pick the right pass. So I'm excited to see a bit more of him. We only saw him a few times last year. It's interesting that he's not finding himself on the bench more regularly ahead of his brother now. I thought at this stage he might have surpassed him, but there's obviously something going on at training to keep his feet on the ground, and the guys feel that Ross Byrne still deserves his position in the 23.
Do you, to stave off what we've seen happen before, and one of them ending up going off to one of the other provinces, which, as Leo Cullen has said himself in the last few weeks, is becoming a bit of a frustration for him. Do they try to do that Kiwi thing of put one of them into, by the sounds of things, maybe Ross into the back three and try and work it that way?
Yeah, I don't think Ross is going to be a 10. I don't see him being a back three player. I think Harry could play at in the back three. I think he could play 15. Before you know what his catching skills are like. His kicking game is pretty reasonable from what I've seen, but because he has that attacking mentality, that he would fit well, and he sees space and he understands the opposition defensive lines, and when there's an opportunity to take on a front row or a tight five player versus when an outside back is there to be stuck and create space for someone else on the outside. So of the two, I would think there's more likelihood of Harry playing in the back three. But it is a bit of an embarrassment of riches when you look at the caliber of the three or even four of them. I haven't seen Frawley last week playing at number 12. He's a very adept footballer as well, very capable. So it's going to be difficult to keep everyone interested, feel as though everyone gets enough game time for them to want to continue to play for Leinster. It's inevitable that at some stage, one of them is going to want to go and get more first-team football. It's just a matter of whether it'll be before or after Johnny Sexton exiting the scene.
Yeah, that leads us perfectly into a conversation about Ian Madigan and his position in Irish rugby at the minute. He's big time, was the comment from Dan McFarlane after the game, and the cojones on him, I suppose, the big thing that's been shown here. And now suddenly a question about who starts at 10 for Ulster.
I still don't think that's a question to be posed, to be honest with you. I think Billy Burns is still the number one. I think personally in attack, Billy Burns offers more than Ian Madigan. There is no doubt that Ian Madigan has big cojones and always has. He's been someone that's backed his ability, particularly as a goal kicker, in clutch moments to deliver. He is turned into a world-class goal kicker for a long time at this stage. For the last number of years with Leinster, I didn't see a lot of him over in Bordeaux. And when he played for Bristol, he kicked those clutch kicks, and he relishes the opportunity to do it. But the bit that I have seen of him coming on, again, talking about the type of player, I think he fits into a bit more of the Ross Byrne mould than the Harry Byrne mould, where I think he still plays off the line a little bit too much. I think he still crabs across the field too much. And so the knock-on effect is that he gets defences drifting and makes it easy to nullify the attack out wide. I think Billy Burns plays a little bit more aggressively, even though he plays a little bit too laterally for my liking at times. He still takes the ball a little bit more to the line. I think he's more capability of pulling that last second pass than Ian Madigan does at this moment in time. So I think they stick with him. He's become a very important player. Just because Ian Madigan kicks 2 clutch goals at the end doesn't make the rest of his game perfect. It gives the team huge confidence that they've got this backup, but I still think that Billy Burns is number one. I'd be shocked to see if he doesn't retain the number 10 jersey.
Right, yeah. I mean, even that is as you said, they've got that in their armoury if needed. And the other question, obviously, about 9, Brian, about John Cooney, it's amazing because he's been he's been one of the revelations of Irish rugby, not to mind Ulster rugby over the last 18 months or a couple of years, I suppose. But now talk of him being dropped for this game. What's your take? Stick or twist?
You're right. He has been one of the informed players in Ireland, and it's so unfortunate from his perspective that he he didn't get the chance to start against Italy, which was written in the stars earlier on this year in the next Six Nations game. With COVID coming along and everything being stalled, it gave everybody else an opportunity to catch up, to refine their game, to get that right. And yeah, I suppose it took the edge off him. He was playing with this oozing confidence, and everything just seemed a little bit easier. He was seeing the game a bit better and quicker than people, and things were just falling for him. He was running great at support lines, picking up easy tries, making clutch kicks. So it was all happening for him. Unfortunately, for the last 3 weeks, it hasn't really happened for him. And maybe he's trying too hard. Maybe he's in a hurry to try and pick up where he left off. But it hasn't really happened. His, whether he's getting enough communication from those around him. I think there's been some stray passing. He's just looked a little bit out of sorts. We haven't seen him with, breaking with ball in hand like we did previously. Obviously, his goal kicking is still very solid, but he just doesn't look like the John Cooney that we saw earlier on in the year. And it just shows how fickle confidence can be, where you're cock of the walk. One day you have this break, and then all of a sudden you've forgotten what that confidence feels like, and it can whittle away very, very quickly. And all of a sudden it won't have done that confidence any favours at all when he's reading reports that Albie Matheson might come in instead of him. He was pulled ashore on the 42nd or 43rd minute at the weekend, feeling they needed a completely different tempo. And Matheson did revolutionise the game. He brought in energy to Ulster. He gave a go forward. The speed of delivery off the base of the ruck was much quicker. He wasn't waiting for them to set into systems. So maybe you do go with a confidence player at the moment. But, I feel for John Cooney, because it was all teeing itself up very nicely for him. There was talk of him being the Lions scrum half next year and everything. So we just have to wait and see. He'll come back again, but it's just a little bit of dip on the very lofty standards that he set earlier on in the year.
Yeah, geez, it'd be a big blow for him to be dropped for such a big game as well. In one word, which way are you going?
Leinster, because I just think, the quality they have, and even if they're considering the likes of Ross Byrne coming in at number 10 to still be able to get the job done, shows the confidence that they feel in all of their squad. Players seamlessly are able to dip in and out. I'm reading reports that James Ryan's meant to start again, where they have the ability to rest the likes of Luke McGrath for next week. Will Connors, there's talk of Joshua Lafleur coming back in. So when you're looking at taking guys out to give them a bit of a respite and then bringing that sort of quality in, it just shows the strength of their squad. Be interested to see what the bookies have them as. Ulster will need an absolutely enormous performance. Coetzee, McCluskey will have to give great go forward, and they'll just have to play with a determination and doggedness that we haven't seen from Ulster for certainly these last 3 games, but for a while, if they're to compete with this Leinster team, because they're a finely tuned machine at the minute.
Before, in the last couple of minutes that we've left, I wanted to get a word from you on Munster's issues and how big they are. Or otherwise, there's been a lot made, obviously, about the box kicking issue that they kept going to the box kick against Leinster, and I wondered, in and of itself, obviously, who really cares? But the bigger point being that maybe there's some a deficit of on-field leadership that couldn't identify that and move away to something else. Is that how you see it, or I suppose? Yeah, in the broader sense, how big are Munster's issues?
I was reading Gordon Darcy today, and it was a pretty punchy article in the Irish Times, but I think he got it right. I think there does seem to be a bit of a lack of on-field leadership. I think, I feel for someone like CJ Stander, who is trying his guts out and, again, playing well on both sides of the ball. He's not the perfect game. He could modify parts of his game, but he's given it everything, whereas you feel as though, I wonder, is the coach being challenged? If that is the game plan that we saw at the weekend, why are the senior players not coming in and challenging that? No one wants to chase box kicks for the day. You might be good at it, but when it doesn't work for you, you have to have a plan B. And I was amazed that they didn't have the capability to go to a slightly different game. And it doesn't shock me that Leinster or that Munster have gone out in another semi-final. I think they've become a quarter-final, semi-final team with the caliber of players that they have, and that's the reality of it. I said it for the last couple of years as well. If you look at European knockout stages and domestic league knockout stages, you need an international pack and an international tight five. And Munster don't have that. I don't think they have any of the nastiness that they had in the past when teams were fearful of them. It's a huge shame that Sheahan has been injured and has had such a serious injury, because he brought that, it was going to bring that ballast and that nasty edge to their pack, with a little bit of offloading as well thrown in too. Whereas I don't see where you get it there. I just don't. I think, you've got guys that have been stalwarts of Munster, but I don't think you're going to be winning titles regularly with Billy Holland in the second row, with Archer and Ryan a tight head. I think Kilcoyne was missed massively in the game, his ball carrying. They really missed having a second option besides CJ to go to. So for me, it starts up front, and I don't think they have a platform to be able to deliver quality to a talented outside backline to be in the mix with teams that are slightly better than them. And JJ obviously missing kicks as well. I feel for him, you hear the announcement that he'd won the Golden Boot for the year, and then he went and missed one sitter and one bad one. So those things will definitely leave a little scar, particularly with the knowledge that Carberry's not coming back anytime soon. So it's going to be a little bit of soul searching over the next few weeks before next season begins.
Yeah, and even from the coach's point of view, he's got a couple of years to run his contract, hanging his hat on an out half who can't kick him to a win or kick him 3 points in return for 80 minutes is pretty poor. Lots more to get to, Brian. We've run out of time.
So on the wall, Adrian, and understand the conversations within the coaching ticket. It's impossible to see Steve Larkham's imprint. I think we saw it at times throughout the year with some nice launch plays. But I wonder, are teams now, particularly Munster, look as though their launch plays are there to set themselves up for the next phase? Why aren't you trying to score tries off launch? It's particularly off scrum, some of the best ball to play with. Try and go and rip teams apart off scrum play. If you can get a solid scrum, you'll never have that many players tied into one position or into one situation. So take advantage of it. It just feels as though it's a setup to get into their systems, to get into their processes, which, to be honest with you, haven't worked for them.
Yeah, and maybe last weekend is the catalyst to rip up the playbook and go again. We shall see you over the next while. Brian, thanks a million.
Come on, Adrian, thanks.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
OTB Sports, in partnership with Cadbury FC, have kicked off a brand new series of in-depth chats with some of the biggest names in Premier League and Irish football history. The second of these sees Ian Wright.
I love watching great players play. I love watching great games.
And Sol Campbell sit down for an in-depth chat, which will be brought to you on OTB social channels and OTB Sports Radio on Thursday, 17th of September. Check out CadburyFC.com for updates on promotions and giveaways.
Into sports.
20 yards out, Ursa shoot, got shoot! Oh, what a goal for Fabinho! Wow!
Then get into the all-new OTB Sports app.
I think when he apologises to me, I probably will say hello to him, yeah. No.
Videos, sports news, live scores, interviews.
If Fabregas is going to come up to me in the street and give me some of the mouth that he would have given me on a football pitch, what would he get a slap?
Plus, exclusive content on the OTB Podcast Network. The biggest names in sports. Ready when you are. Search OTB Sports on your app store and download it now.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
You're welcome back. It is 7:59 on this Thursday morning. If you're just joining us, you have missed Brian O'Driscoll in conversation with Adrian Barry. That full piece available now on the OTB Sports app, and you can get it back on YouTube as well if you missed that. We kick off at 7:30 every morning, by the way, with our best bits from the previous night's show. For the next couple of hours, we've got plenty coming your way. We're in conversation with Aidan O'Mahony in about 15 minutes' time. He's going to be chatting about overcoming his fears in terms of sea swimming, and he's also going to be talking about some of the hardest opponents he's ever faced. We're going to be joined as well later on by Joshua Bull, who is the Oxford mathematician who won Fantasy Premier League last year. Some of you may not have played FPL for a few years now, but the game has certainly changed. Magnus Carlson, and this Oxford mathematician, right up at the top of the leaderboard over the course of the last season, so he'll be telling us why that is and how data-driven his processes are, and he'll give you a few tips as well for your fantasy team for this season. We're going to have Graham Hunter with us to sift through the finally settled dust at Barcelona, and Mike Carlson is back with us on OTB AM to look ahead to the NFL season, which kicks off tonight with a fairly good fixture as well. Kansas City up against Houston in that one. You can get in touch with us by tweeting us at Off The Ball or drop us a comment on YouTube. Gilroy, very good morning.
How are you, Owen? What's going on?
Quite a lot is going on. It feels like a pincer movement is occurring on our senses this weekend, where from the left side you have the NFL barging at us with their offensive linemen, and from the right side you've got Jurgen Klopp and Frank Lampard with their wars of words coming at us with all the hashtag narrative you could possibly dream of. Are you primed for this? Are you primed for this mega weekend?
And the Pro 14 final thrown into the mix as well, plus some good quality county finals. We're getting to the business end of the GAA club season, where it's actually a bunch of good teams against a bunch of good teams.
And a Game 7 in the NBA on Friday night, just to put that in there. If you're just waking up, confirmed last night, the Raptors are back in the Game 7, which can only lead to good things, 2 o'clock Friday night. So it is, I think that's a 5-pronged attack on our senses. To call it a pincer movement this weekend is actually doing it a disservice. I did want to just chat about the NFL. So Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to be one of the most fascinating teams in football this year. I'm sure you'll go into great depth in them in the Snap this week, which is Off The Ball's fantasy, or Off The Ball's NFL podcast, which you should check out. The thing that connects Tampa Bay, obviously, with the Premier League is the Glazers. And we were kind of pondering this before coming on air this morning. Which is a bigger likelihood, that the Glazers have a bit of meaningful silverware to show at the end of this season as a result of being Tampa owners or Manchester United owners? Now, by meaningful trophy, we're talking Premier League, Champions League, but let's throw the FA Cup in here. What is more likely to happen?
Well, if you're throwing the FA Cup in here, then you are saying that they could win the NFC, which is like reaching the Super Bowl. You get a trophy for that. There's 2 trophies in American football. You win your conference, and then there's the Super Bowl that you play off. So there's like a reasonable chance, actually, that the greatest quarterback of all time throwing the ball to the greatest tight end of all time with 2 brilliant receivers and a reasonable offensive line and a decent defense could actually see Tom Brady hoisting something at the end of the season. The conference they play in, nowhere near a stack. They don't have to come up against Lamar Jackson or the Kansas City Chiefs. They have to play a bunch of other teams who are about a similar level to them. So on their day, with a bit of run, and if the 72-year-old Tom Brady can stay fit, then I would say there's a better chance there, because it's an old wizened coach who's in charge, who's seen everything, who's been around the block, and who's been a bit of a quarterback whisperer in the past. Is that more likely to succeed than Ole Gunnar Solskjaer? I think you've taken the cowardly way out here and included the FA Cup, which they could have won last season, though. And let's face it, like they could easily have won it last season. So you said meaningful. You're an Arsenal fan. You're one of the few people in the world who actually count the FA Cup now as being important. If it was the league or the European trophy, then I would say, well, I'm going with the Bucks.
Okay, so what if we fine tune it to Super Bowl or Premier League / Champions League? Are you staying with the Bucks in that situation?
Yeah, I don't think there's any chance Manchester United win the league. I think there's it's a cup competition, so of course they could win the Champions League. A run of form, a couple of one-off matches, a couple of one-off big performances, and then a very strong defensive stand, quarterfinals, semi-finals, final. Could they do that? Yeah, they could do that.
Yeah.
But still, I still think that what Tom Brady has achieved is absolutely remarkable. I was watching back the U2 halftime show from 2001. That was Tom Brady's first Super Bowl victory in 2002, February 2002. This is 2020. In 2021, he's going to be going and trying to win again for a 7th time. It's unbelievable.
To put that into context, Kieran McGeeney was lifting Sam Maguire the first year Tom Brady won a Super Bowl. It's just an incredible longevity. It does beg the question, though, how seriously are we taking this Super Bowl charge? Obviously, they have got a stacked offense around him. I'm not sure, you might be able to tell us more about the defense that they have. I'm actually simply not sure what they've got. But the offense is only as good as your quarterback, and is Tom Brady going to be good enough to actually lead a Super Bowl winning team, given what we've seen in recent years where the likes of Jackson and Mahomes have taken us to a whole new level?
I don't know. And we're going to find that out. And that's why it's going to be a really interesting season. Like, this is one of those years where you look around the league and there aren't that many question marks at quarterback. So you actually get to feel pretty positive about what the outcome is going to be. Almost every division has at least one good quarterback and generally two good quarterbacks. Some of them at the wrong end of their career. In this instance, obviously, you've got Ben Roethlisberger and Philip Rivers as well, who are both trying to have big comebacks. So we'll see. But it's just the televisual experience of sitting on your couch and watching Red Zone on a Sunday night is still, as far as I'm concerned, the best TV experience of being a sports fan that there is at the moment, because the quality play comes thick and fast. The level of coverage, the level of camera work, the investment that they've made in the technology is fairly sensational. Just so you mentioned Kieran McGeeney there, and it brought to mind the time recently when Dave McIntyre was in the full throes of his own physical change, where he became, BP Dave, where he would come into the office drinking full shakes, and he went to interview McGeeney, and basically for months afterwards spoke about the python-sized forearms of Kieran McGeeney, to the point where in the middle of the interview he stopped it and went, do you think you could go back out and play now? Like, would you be able to actually play inter-county football now? And McGeeney kind of looked at him and went, is he taking the piss out of me here? Am I? And I think he answered semi-seriously, he's like, no, I'd just be a little bit off. So you were throwing shade at McGeeney, essentially, was what I was hearing there, that he wasn't still going, given that Tom Brady was, still going.
Yeah.
He just needs a TB12 in his life, and he could be lining out for Armagh. It's only the 5-week season,
Player manager Kieran McGeeney, this could be the development that 2020 really needs. Just one other thing we wanted to touch on, because it's not going to make it to the papers this morning because it was news that developed late last night, is that David Clifford won't be available to play for East Kerry tomorrow night in their county championship semi-final. There were a couple of rumours doing the rounds last night that David Clifford was going to get off from his suspension, which to say that was surprising would be to put it lightly, because he didn't deserve to get off. It's as simple as that. It's just, I guess, the situation where we'll be talking about something that would be bordering on a mini scandal had that happened this morning, but it's not. He's got his 1-game ban. And this is amazing what GEA streaming is doing. It's really helping the disciplinary process that you can actually have. Sorry, go on.
Is it ruining it, Owen? Is that actually what's happening here? Where in previous years, there would have been a grand fudge where everybody was like, so I only saw the incident this morning. It looks like he kind of kicks out or lifts a leg or lifts a knee in the general direction of his opponent, and his opponent goes down, and the referee, I think, clearly saw it and so issues the red card. But like in times of yore, there would have been a 12-hour hearing where enough extraneous pieces of evidence were entered into evidence, and an explanation was arrived that it was an involuntary tangling of legs, referee, and away you go, and the best player in the country gets to play in the next game. Alternatively, the county management team step in and say, we actually want him fresh, training starting next week, and we've got an All-Ireland where we can actually stop the dubs. So, I'm wondering who this works out best for. If they go out in the next round, he's fit, he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder, and he's ready to slay all before him, Cork, and then subsequently Dublin in Christmas week. I mean, this isn't a bad thing really for Kerry, no matter what happens. But I do think that it's like with every game being streamed, all of a sudden, you're not going to have lads pushing referees over and nobody seeing it and getting away with it.
The big loser here is TG Cahir. They have the game tomorrow night, and the main reason why you're going to stop when you're flicking channels tomorrow night is because David Clifford is playing. But obviously that's not going to happen for them. So you'd have to feel for them a little bit that that's not the case, but it was the correct decision. I mean, it would have been a pretty bad indictment of a referee if they had actually said, no, the very same thing that you saw, we're looking at this and we can't, we are going to let him get away with it. So that's not going to happen. Like, it is interesting what you're talking about. One of like, that's obviously the negative spin of putting on it. I mean, the positive spin on what we've seen over the last little while is that we have this massive body of evidence of club games, which a lot of people don't always tend to get. Like, no matter what county you are from, you all of a sudden have probably more information about form, about the players that are playing, about their attributes this season than you've done at any other point because the games would never be televised, and if you didn't go to that game, then you probably wouldn't get the information, whereas now you can actually buy your stream, watch it back, even if you're watching a different game at the same time, and I think everybody's a little bit more educated.
Look, this is the way of the future. This is absolutely going to continue, irrespective of whether or not people are allowed back in grounds. You can see that it's a new source of revenue for county boards, and it obviously works. People are happy to pay a $5 or a $10 or whatever it is to subscribe and get a bunch of GA matches that are relevant to them. Like, this literally happens in almost every other sport in the world, and the technology has caught up to the point where it's cheap and easy to do. You can do this from a phone, and it's grand. Like, obviously it's better if you invest a little bit more in your equipment, but actually people are getting to the point where they can follow the play. The commentary is relatively straightforward. All you want to see is the scores, and we're going to get to a point where a three-camera setup is really easy. So there's one behind the 2 goals and one in the midfield, and all of a sudden somebody presses a button, and it's as simple as that. Like, the technology is right there at the moment. So
it's been really good.
Clearly going to happen.
Like, it's like all the games I've watched have been I was thinking to myself, is it going to be that one camera setup? And it's not. It's like been really impressive.
Have you watched a lot of the games?
I've watched a handful, certainly. Not as much as I would have liked at the start, but over the last 2 rounds, I've definitely paid to watch a couple of games. And they've all, like, I mean, the production quality is excellent. And the thing you actually almost get left wanting is more. You're kind of like, why didn't they do this game or that game? Obviously, there's a finite level of resources and stuff. Like, not all of these Kerry's games have been streamed, for example, and that was one little disappointment. But that's a good thing, because it's obviously a product that you want more of. Just on a final point on this, like, what we've seen in recent summers is that we've got compressed weekends where there's no coverage of certain games and they just kind of go by the wayside a little bit. This year's championship is going to be more compressed than ever in a shorter window. Granted, there's no backdoor, but for those games that aren't on Sky or on RTE, I think they should be doing the exact same thing and putting them behind a paywall, streamed by the county board. They're talking, what was it, about a 19 million quid deficit to actually get a GAA championship up and running this year. That might delay some of it. It's not going to make you, it's not going to have you rolling in money at the end of the day, but it might be something. Because you're right, every other league is doing this. This is absolutely the way forward. I just hope that the cloak and dagger nature of the CCC or the CCCC and actually interacting with those bodies won't preclude us from seeing more. But I'm sure that this is just a bit of an outlier. Sheahan, good morning to you.
Morning, gentlemen. How are things?
Not too bad. What's going on this morning?
Plenty's going on this morning. We should start with Sam Bennett, because he's still on course for that big ride into the Champs-Élysées in Paris on September 20th and that green jersey. So, he'll take a commanding 68-point lead into that longest stage of this year's Tour de France. This is the 222-kilometre trek from Chauvigny to Sarre. We thought we had it bad for that OTB duathlon. 222 kilometres is just ridiculous. Features an intermediate sprint as well, a quarter of the way in. Bennett's nearest challenger for the green jersey, Peter Sagan, bumped down to last place on yesterday's stage for an infringement on Wout van Aert. The yellow jersey of Primož Roglic could come under threat today as well. He holds a 21-second lead currently over Egan Bernal. So plenty of interesting talking points from the Tour de France heading into today. Some soccer. Newcastle United say they're considering legal action after admitting a takeover bid failed the Premier League owners and directors test. In late July, a €330 million bid led by the Saudi Public Investment Fund was withdrawn 17 weeks after it was accepted. Newcastle claimed the bid has no connection to the Saudi government and that the Premier League acted inappropriately. Thiago appears to be finally edging towards a long-mooted move to Liverpool. Bild in Germany said the 29-year-old has already agreed terms with the Premier League champions. All that remains to be sorted is the fee, with Bayern Munich seeking €30 million. Serena Williams remains on course for a record equalling 24th Grand Slam singles tennis title. The American 6-time US Open champion fought back from a set down to reach the last 4 of the tournament by beating Svetlana Pirankova of Bulgaria. She'll now face unseeded Victoria Azarenka after the Belarusian thrashed Elise Mertens 6-1, 6-love. It's women's semi-finals night tonight in New York. First up, 2018 winner Naomi Osaka takes on the American Jennifer Brady. In the men's singles, Dominic Thiem last night made light work of Alex de Minaur in straight sets to reach the last 4. Thiem will now face Daniil Medvedev. Shane Lowry and Seamus Power both in action as the new US PGA Tour season gets underway today. Lowry plays alongside Phil Mickelson and Brendan Steele for the opening round of the Safeway Open that's in California. Power will be in one of the first groups out at Silverado, playing alongside Chesson Hadley and Kyung Hoon Lee. On the European Tour, Gavin Moynihan, Cormac Sharvin and Jonathan Caldwell are all in the field for the Portugal Masters. That is in Vila Moura. And I'll finish with some Formula 1 news this morning, lads. Sebastian Vettel is set to confirm he will drive for Racing Point in the next Formula 1 season after Sergio Perez announced he'll be leaving at the end of the current campaign. The Mexican driver revealed his departure ahead of this weekend's Tuscan Grand Prix. After 7 years with the team, Racing Point will be rebranded next season as Aston Martin.
Great stuff, Shane. Thanks a million for that. It is 8:15 on this Thursday morning. OTB Sports, in partnership with Cadbury FC, have kicked off a brand new series of in-depth chats with some of the biggest names in football. The second episode sees Ian Wright and Sol Campbell sit down for an in-depth chat, which will be brought to you on OTB's social channels and OTB Sports Radio on Thursday the 17th of September. Check out cadburyfc.com for updates on promotions and giveaways. Right, up next, we're going to be speaking to Aidan O'Mahony.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Okay, so Ireland Active Fitness Day is happening on September 24th, and it's going to see people across the country getting involved in a host of free activities in leisure centres and gyms. Schools, workplaces and exercise professionals are also getting in on the action as well. Aidan O'Mahony is an Ireland Active ambassador. Aidan, you're also a strength and conditioning coach. We were chatting with Serena earlier on about how there seems to be a greater interest and a countrywide fascination with exercise over the last little while. Is that something you've seen firsthand, people wanting to get fitter than they've ever been before?
I think so, yeah. I think especially with the lockdown, I think when the lockdown started, you might have a lot of idle minds, and I think we're living in a kind of a world at the moment where we talk a lot about mental health and even that mindset. I know for myself, like I use the fitness side of it because obviously, number one, I've used it all my life, but I think that enjoyment you get from it, and I just think during the lockdown, I think you've seen people walking, running, getting up and getting out that you might have seen before, and I just think it's very important, and getting that habit of getting into fitness, it's, as I said, it's very important for people's mindset, and as I said, the last couple of months have been very strange, and I suppose we've been into the unknown where we've never been before, and that can be very tough on people that are working, and all of a sudden that you're at home and you have nothing to do. So I think fitness is just a key part that it goes hand in hand with mental health as well.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people would have taken up either running or sea swimming or cycling or something like that, and it will have been new for them, and they would have got fit maybe for the first time in a while, and there's an excitement about that. For someone like you, how did you manage to find that excitement? Because you didn't have team sport. I'd assume that running 5K around the block doesn't quite cut it for you.
Yeah, I suppose the great thing, Owen, during the lockdown, there was challenges week in, week out, and no different to everyone. We're all a bit competitive, so there was people trying to break 5Ks, running back roads and up and hills and down hills. But the one thing I find is that when I finished playing football, everyone talks about that void, and obviously it came out and the start of the fitness business, and I think when you're running a fitness business like this, you have to be kind of part of what you preach as well. And look, I love it. It's part of me, as I said. A healthy mind is a healthy body. And I just during the lockdown, I started running 5Ks, 10Ks. I think I did a video out in the rain there that I was nearly carried in the white jacket because of it. I had all my equipment out the back, and I have 2 young kids at home, so I'm not going to be leaving the equipment indoors because but there are 2 girls now to start going at it, and next with broken toes and broken fingers. But yeah, look, I just think that from the J side of it, when it was taken away, you need something to kind of replace that. And I just think the fitness side, I started getting into 5Ks and 10Ks in the last couple of years, basically because I know people always say, you shouldn't do that because it won't be good for the knees now, and you're playing football, so you'll be no good at doing that. And I loved it. I loved that challenge of it. And even when the lockdown kind of opened up there, I took up open water swimming. And basically the question you've asked me there, the reason I took it up was because it was something I could never see myself doing. I have a fear of water. I was kind of telling myself, you have 2 young kids at home and they'll be learning to swim at their schools, and you might be going holidays, and it's a very bad sign if their dad can't get into the water to mind their kids. So I took that leap to get a wetsuit and to go back to Phoenix and start open water swimming. Now, as everyone said, the first couple of weeks, Jesus, going great for you. And I see the pictures on your socials, and I was saying it's going great because I'm standing in 3 foot of water, and I can get up and down in 3 foot of water every day. And I think it was like the 10th lesson, my coach said to me, right, we'll go out there now to the first marker out there, which is maybe 100 or 150 feet. And I just said to him, no. And he said, what's wrong with you? And I just said, I can't. He said, what are you afraid of? And I was there like everything. Like if a piece of seaweed rubbed off me in the water, I was saying, Jesus, what's that? He would kind of think jaws and these kind of things. And just that fear, that kind of fear of taking that leap, and I just couldn't do it. And I remember going home and just saying to Denise, my wife, just I couldn't do it. I froze. It was always in my mind, like it was hard, number one, to start breathing in the water. It was something totally different to me, and I was trying to make up every excuse that it was the asthma that was catching me. And then the following day, he just said to me, right, I'm going to go get my goggles there, I'm going to swim out. And I just said to myself, if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. And I did, and just that relief, and as you speak there about people starting up something new, just that joy you get out of just doing something new and breaking a barrier is unreal. No matter if you get off the couch and walk out the door and do 10 steps, when you just do something new and you just break that kind of duct in it, it's a great feeling. Now, I won't be swimming in the Olympics or doing anything ridiculous like that anytime soon, but it's just that joy of doing something new. And look, I know that I'm always trying something different. Maybe it's that little bit of madness in me, but I enjoy that, testing myself.
How do you find that ability to actually cross that barrier? Some people listening may say, oh, that's easy, swimming out 100 feet away from the shore. Some people will be absolutely on your side and more on that side, absolutely terrified of the prospect of setting foot into the water. And that may manifest itself in other ways for people, as you say, actually trying to run outside their front door and run in public could actually be the thing that terrifies people. Do you have something in your head that you think about, or a trigger that you go to when you are trying to cross those sort of barriers?
Yeah, so look, I knew day one when I went out in the water, like I knew I wouldn't go deep, and plus the wetsuit kind of keeps you off that buoyancy in it. But there was a funny thing about Phoenix, the crabs were coming into D shell, and in the first 5 or 6 lessons I wasn't getting, the distance wasn't going too well, and like the coach would be saying, like, well, why are you stopping now when you're grasping for air? Obviously I wasn't breathing properly, number one. And the second thing then, after maybe about a half an hour to lesson, he was like, Jesus, he said, all of a sudden, he said, you're getting great lengths in your stride, and you're going good long distance. And the lesson finished, and I just said to him, look, I said, I'll be honest with you now. I said, every time I looked down the water, I could see the crabs underneath me. And I was afraid to put down my feet. I was just swimming for life. See, would I get a small piece of sand that I could actually put down my feet? So it's amazing what will come into your mind. But I just think the mindset for me was that, obviously, as I said, my kids are at home, and like I want to be able to get into a pool and know they're safe. And I just think that, like, I still have that fear. Like I swam out first boy, whatever it's called, and Jesus, like I swam in like I was in the Olympics. I couldn't get in quick enough just to get my feet back on the ground. Like, and that was my biggest fear. Like, number one, not knowing what's underneath you. And like, as someone says, look, there's nothing inside the sea that's going to do any harm to you. But as I said, it's just that fear of the unknown, and where it wasn't something I had done before. And maybe I probably got a fright as well, like where I'd probably tried to get swimming lessons before, and I jumped into deep end, and I got a fright, and I didn't go back in since. Yeah. Like, I'm probably always, you should practice what you preach about, probably facing your fears. It took me till I was nearly 40 years of age to face that fear. I know I still have it. Like, it's just kind of every day just trying to get that bit further. And I've kind of set myself a challenge for the end of September of doing a triathlon. Now, I didn't realise the last 2 weeks that the waters were closed down in Kerry, so I couldn't get out to swim. I think the furthest I've gone is 150 metres. I'd say if I do the triathlon at the end of September, there'll be a boat or a dinghy very nearby to maybe a few hundred metres as well.
It's interesting that you're talking about doing a triathlon at the moment. I've also seen in your social media you've taken up Olympic weightlifting, essentially. Like, people, like, you're still a footballer, first and foremost, like your current club footballer, Aidan O'Mahony. How do you find that actually impacts you on your football? Because you've alluded to the fact that people advise against doing certain things for your knees and the aches and aging and all that sort of thing. Is that sort of thing actually complementing you on the pitch, do you find?
Oh, absolutely. I was probably looking enough where Jason McGahan, who's over the head of, I suppose, development in Kerry now at the moment, where he brought in a group of us at the start of the year and introduced us to UKSCA, and we had someone come over and they started giving demos. And like, I put up a post there, I think 2 or 3 days ago, where I showed myself, like, like, you have to be very honest with people as well, like, that these things don't happen overnight. And I put up a post where I had the overhead bar the very first day, and like, my depth was just ridiculous. And like, you talk about inter-county players now, like, you need all those, like, whether it's catching a ball in the air or just your mobility. It's come really to the top of the game where I started out. There was no talk about mobility or movement. Now they're at the forefront in your warm-ups and all these things. And I just see the Olympic lifting now where, like, I'm still playing the club and probably fortunate enough that I'm captain of my club this year. As I said, they're probably saying, we'll give him captaincy this year now, so we actually get rid of him. He might say, we'll finally go. But I actually feel like a young fellow, and it might be a mad thing to say, but like, every night I go training, and we're kind of in the running block at the moment, I gear myself that I want to be up the front. And that's been all year. And I find with the Olympic lifting now at the moment that suddenly something new has hit the body where I have more movement, I have more mobility. Yes, I'm getting older and the legs aren't as quick as what they were before. But there's that kind of mindset thing of it as well, where you're doing something new. And even with the swimming as well, I think they go kind of hand in hand, where I find myself now, like, I go in, I do a hard session with the club. I go into the water the following day and I'll do my swimming lesson, and I'll find that's good for recovery. I go out in the following day, I'll do my Olympic lifts. And I just think at the moment that I'm looking to do it, and I just think with the lockdown as well, where I've seen where all those things are taken away from you and you're on your own a lot. And I loved, like, I suppose, being involved in the GA, that collective side of it. And now that I'm back at it, I'm not giving out about it. I just enjoy doing it. And I know there's going to be a time where, like, the club scene obviously will be number one, where they'll be saying, look, it's time to kind of, you need to walk away from it. And there's probably a lot of people saying it, but they're not saying it to my face. But I'm really enjoying it at the moment, and I love the training side of it. So look, I'm happy to keep doing what I'm doing.
You said there, obviously, that things have changed quite a bit in GAA circles over the years, where you can really appreciate how somebody doing that sort of weightlifting would benefit them in today's day and age. And I'm sure there are plenty of current inter-county footballers as well doing exactly what you're doing as well to try and get that edge. When did you realise that inter-county football had actually taken that step up? Was there a particular off-season or something that you remember?
Yeah, like my biggest thing when I was getting older was obviously 12 or 13, where I was finding myself, we'll say from 2010 when I was starting to maybe 2011, where Dublin, I suppose, broke it up that time on the All-Ireland, and then 12 and 13. Like, if you're reading a lot of literature now and stuff and strength and conditioning and sports science, and I can see this now, even this wasn't there back then, but my thinking that time was, you go back with your club in September, October, and then you'd have your off season. And that was my time where I said to myself, right, I have an off season here now. I'll go away on my own. I'll eat up the gym and I'll eat up running. And then when I come back in the pre-season, plenty of people you'll interview now, and they'll talk about, well, when you made it into county scene in 2017 or 2018, how would you find? They'll say, oh, the manager said to me that if I get the jersey day one and I play well in it, then it's mine for championship. So I got into that mindset of my off season was my main season, where I needed to train harder than anyone else, do it myself. And then when I came into the league, and people always ask, geez, why do you keep playing the league? Because that's your shop window. That's where you put your hand up and you start playing well and say, you know, Aidan O'Mahony might have had a good year last year, but geez, he's absolutely flying the league here, and he's made that jersey his own, and next all of a sudden you're starting championship. I think it's gone full circle in football, where you might have no off season now. Like, as I said, that off season is, for me, when I was getting older, that was my season where I kind of went to war with myself and really put in the hard yards and worked myself probably harder than I would have in pre-season, and I was ready then, and I was ahead of probably the rest. Well, what I taught myself, and my mind would be saying, you're ahead of the rest, but then they'd catch up eventually. But you'll be kind of saying to yourself, hopefully I'll have enough done here now to kind of put down a stake for a jersey or something like that. Like, but I just think that the off-season was just key for me.
That's very interesting. There's one last thing I wanted to just put to you, and I realise I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but last year we had Tommy Welsh on the show, and he was talking about the top 5 strongest hurlers he's ever come up against. So I think Tommy Welsh would be a good judge of that. Given your expertise in strength and conditioning, who would you have in that bracket in terms of footballers that you've come up against, the strongest, the best conditioned footballers you've come up against?
Mm-hmm. Like, I suppose from a Kerry point of view, and I'm probably missing out on fellas here now, but like, you probably pick David Moore, and like, he's a colossal of a unit. Obviously himself and Tommy Walsh would fit that. But I've seen Tommy in the gym, and that's Tommy Walsh with Kerry. Like, it's just frightening, unnatural strength. And like, probably like into county of lads I've marked, you'll have the likes of Look, Michael Murphy, like you were talking there about natural strength as well, but like I know like he's a great guy off the pitch, but you'd know when that guy goes training and he does his own work that like it's 110%, and you just see it in games because he gets plenty of attention. He's well able to, like, for a forward in the modern game. Another guy you see is Andy Moore. That's why he's such longevity in his career as well. Like, and you see him even there last weekend again. You know, you put that cuteness to with that fitness side of it, and that's the element that has brought him on. Other fellas, obviously you've Aidan O'Mahony, another guy. You talk about natural strength, and when you put strength and conditioning onto an athlete like that, it just brings them to a different level. And I suppose if I don't mention the Dublin fellas, I'd be shocked. Like a fella I've admired for Dublin for years is James McCarthy. I just love his style of football. I love the way he plays it. He plays it on the edge. He's a beautiful footballer, and he's a Rolls Royce for footballer as well, the way he runs. And I just think he's kind of cut, and his strength has gone to a different level. And if I'm going to put a second player with him, I'd put Conor O'Callaghan. You'd see the difference. Like people commenting last year about the size and like it has taken nothing away from his game. And like, I suppose you look back in my time when I got dropped that time, like a lot of people say, sure, look, he put on too much conditioning, he's doing too much in the gym. And when you don't have the science to back it up, or you don't have an athlete, like, which I'd be talking about myself, to kind of say, Jesus, yeah, he's actually right. I was doing too much in the gym. That's why I wasn't picked, instead of giving myself a kick up the arse and kind of saying, you need to bring something new to your game. These fellas are, and every year, like as I said, Conor O'Callaghan probably realised the first year, I've had a massive year here. But if I want to go to the next level and keep the fellas from behind me catching up, I need to put on strength and conditioning and just add to speed with that. And that's what coaches do now. They're so well, I suppose, educated, and if you even look at social media you nearly educate yourself on what you need to do. I suppose the biggest things from inter-county is that you're peaking at the right times. But like those players I named, like they have brought that to their games where they enjoy the contact side. No different to what I do myself. But like obviously as a defender, sometimes when you miss the contact, it doesn't bear too good for you what happens behind you. But I just think it's gone to different. Like, and you can imagine over the next couple of years, it's always going to go full circle. There's going to be something new brought in.
Yeah. Did you always feel that Dublin were a step ahead of everybody else in that department, or what was your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't think they were a step ahead, but I just think they're unbelievable athletes. If you look at their half back line, the likes of Keane O'Sullivan, James McCarthy, and Jack McCaffrey, like I'd love to know what they run 100 metres in, because they are absolutely frightening athletes. So like they probably had the best of both worlds when you put conditioning on them then as well, like you bring them to a different level again. So I just think they're like, you look at Brian Finton, people always spoke about him, about like his swimming ability, that he was at the top of his chain in swimming, like, and you could see that with his catching and his overall game as well, like mobility he has, and he's just a massive engine. So they're blessed with athletes. But yes, like you're probably right that they have a structure in place there, and like the likes of Brian Cullen come in, and these guys that have brought them to a new level as well. Like, and when you've players come in, you're winning, and you've success like that on as well, you're always looking over your shoulder. When I spoke there about your off season, you probably have those players that are winning 3 or 4 ends in the last couple of years. They want to be involved the next year, so they're going to a different level again.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, Aidan, it's been great chatting with you today. Just a reminder that Ireland Active Fitness Day is happening on September 24th, so make sure to check that out. And when is your big triathlon?
So it's the I wouldn't say it's a big triathlon now, Owen. So if I can do one in Valencia, I'm going to do one in Phoenix, and I'm going to rope in my colleagues now while I'm talking to you. So what I'm going to do is, look, someone said to me there one day, they said, how is the bike and the running going? And I just said to them, I haven't done the bike and I haven't done the running. And they were like, why not? And I said, if I can't get out of the water, the bike isn't going to be much good to me. So, so please, like, hopefully at the end of September, there might be a charity event or something that will raise a few pounds for, and I get out to Phoenix, and I'll do my 750 metres and get on the bike and get on the running. I'll get through that part all right once I get out of the water. Very
good. So you can ask Brian Fenton for a few swimming lessons anyway if you get stuck.
I'll rope him in. If it was December, he'd be ideal. I might wait till December and he might.
All right. Thanks a million, Aidan. Take care.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Yeah, Aidan O'Mahony there. I was chatting to him last week. It is 8:34 a.m. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Right, delighted to say we are joined now by Graham Hunter. Graham, how are you getting on?
Robustly. Oh, it's not really what you're asking, but we've just moved house across the city of Barcelona, and at the moment it's bumper 1, Barcelona 0. So
okay.
I suppose they're packaged up neatly is the answer to your question.
What sort of neighbourhood have you moved into? Have you moved up in the world? Is the quick question, I guess.
Yeah, the second part of that is fatuous. That's ridiculous. It's impossible for me, born with talents I have, to move up in the world. What kind of neighbourhood? One that probably doesn't deserve me, on. To be fair now.
Okay, we'll take that at face value, whatever that means. A neighbourhood that doesn't deserve you. Does Barcelona deserve Lionel Messi? I guess is what we're going to start off with here.
It's like we worked on these links. You're good. You're good.
Everything's fine and rosy in the garden again, isn't it? Everybody's forgiven Lionel Messi. He's back at training. Yeah. Things are all good again.
It's not about forgiving. I don't think that's the central issue, and I think you know that well. I think that what's key is that he's there on sufferance, and to me it's a funny contrast that his people, his father, the team around him, took pretty significant legal advice, detailed legal advice, consulted somebody who'd served on the court for arbitration in sport, and prepped up what they thought would be legal evidence that they were free to leave. And when the whole thing breaks down, Lionel Messi said, well, I would never take Barcelona to court. So you're talking about a real mix of hot and cold water, in that the cold water was that the deal with City was packed out. What will it be like in terms of playing, living, and being paid? That was long packed out. The decision to leave was taken in a moment of hot water. It had been there on his mind for months and months. I think we now know that clearly through sources who have spoken. Certainly I've talked to people who work with the family and who say this was an ongoing discussion for months. And Messi's interview, which was clear-cut, and I take to be both frank and honest, Owen, with Goal.com, where he says that off and on across the season, he told the president that he wanted to go. So the hot water comes after the 8-2. And the clash of saying, I've got lots of legal advice, but I would never take Barcelona to court, that talks to you about a deeply conflicted lad. I mean, I still think he's a lad despite being 33. And I'm not calling him outright, immature or boyish, but his unwillingness to go the full mark in leaving the club means that, and he said so himself, that he's staying under sufferance. And I find that a contradiction, that you're willing to stay, that you accept staying under sufferance in a place you don't want to be. You feel betrayed by the people above you, and you feel dismayed by some of the playing resources around you. And it's my prediction, it's not fact. I think it's going to be a difficult relationship between Koeman and Messi. All of those things, yet you're not willing to follow a legal route and say, we think we've got proof that legally we're allowed to leave. It's a very contradictory situation. Messi's back at training, first of all on his own, because his coronavirus tests that he took were delayed. So the first training session, they didn't have full results. And now he'll be integrated into the training where Barcelona and Atleti and Madrid have got a delayed start to the season because they were in Lisbon with the Champions League, and there's some small concession being made to the fact that we're squeezing the juice out of our top footballers like never before in the history of the sport. So there's a couple of weeks before Barcelona start, and Messi's got a mini pre-season to go through, just like the rest of his teammates. So I don't think it's a case of people around him forgiving him. I think the key to the situation is that he's unhappy. And if there were to be, even though it was peace in our time, there was a real Neville Chamberlain thing going on a couple of Fridays ago, wasn't there? The transfer market's still open. He still doesn't want to be at Barcelona. He's gone on record as saying he feels betrayed. I'm not saying a move is still going to happen, but I personally won't discount a move completely until the market shuts.
Right. So, I mean, to flip that on its head then, how heavily would you count on a further development in this, a further flare-up in tensions before the market closes?
Oh, well, there's two different things. A flare-up in tensions before the market closes, I would think is pretty... Well, if it's not inevitable, I think it's significantly on the cards. Koeman has got 1 year, a one shot at this. He's already a pretty ruthless man, utterly self-confident, and he won't stand for anything that he doesn't like. It doesn't mean that all his judgments will be correct, but the possibility of Messi saying something, doing something, you know, an expression like this in training, coming out a little bit late, not late but tight. You know, it was from the Neymar days when it was Neymar, Suarez, and Messi walking out last to training every day, to then being just Suarez and Messi walking out last to training every day, and sometimes on the button of 11 o'clock if it was an 11 session. So by the time you're actually out on the pitch, maybe it's a minute past. These things won't wash with Koeman, and that doesn't necessarily make him right, because there needs to be elasticity if you're dealing with the greatest player of modern, all-time, take your pick. So flare-ups, I think there's a reasonable chance. That's a euphemism. But the departure, I said, you know, I'm not advancing. I've got snout. It wasn't me kidding on that somebody's saying to me, don't worry, this is still happening. I'm telling you, Barcelona are still in serious debt. They still have to pay him 100 million euros this season coming. Bartomeu won the big battle, you know, inverted commas, imposed himself, fed his own ego. He's still going to go back and look at the accounts. He's still going to talk to Koeman over the coming weeks. All I would say is that we would be stupid not to notice that Messi is unhappy, wanted to leave. He's got a home waiting for him at City, and the market's not closed. I mean, no more than that. But why would we, given how extreme a point the breakdown of his relationship with Bartomeu and the board that will be running the place, and how tense it's likely to be, the relationship between him and the coach, we would be stupid not to be thinking, okay, well, the market is still open, and it's feasible that Bartomeu goes... I mean, let's say a PR man was whispering in Bartomeu's ear. You've won the big war, you've made him stay. Now you can look magnanimous and you can say, we've accepted. City's briefing is, we want him free or nothing at all. But there's always flexibility. Let's say somebody's whispering in Bartomeu's ear, we've decided, we've thought long and hard, Leo, we've proved our point, we won that battle. Now we have to accept that Leo is one of our all-time greats, and we'll find a way to help them. But all that kind of doublespeak, can't you imagine that happening? And him rubbing his hands if he's got some big seven-figure sum from Manchester City and he gets rid of 100 million euros of salary? All I'm saying is it would be naive.
We just appear to have lost the connection there with Graham, and we'll get back to him in just a moment. So naive to think that this thing is signed, sealed and delivered, Ger? That he's a Barcelona player, that is.
I mean, everything Graham says there makes sense. And if you're Ronald Koeman and this is your one shot at glory and you kind of need to be unbelievably successful next season, are you going to be successful with an annoyed Leo Messi who doesn't want to play for you? I mean, you've got to assume that Messi's personal drive will still be as naked as it always has been. And so he will play well next year, irrespective of the mood music around him. Because, you know, it's like those stats all matter. Those goals still matter. Those wins and the European Cup still matters. But is there any chance of this Barcelona team at the moment winning the European Cup without the radical surgery that you're going to be able to undertake better if you don't have that 100 million and his group on the playing staff? Well, very unlikely, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true. Like, I know Graham's back with us now. Graham, like, well, no matter what happens over the next little while, how deep is the damage to the relationship between Lionel Messi and the Barcelona fans? Is it silly to suggest that perhaps the incredible legacy that he's already created at the club might be a little bit tainted?
We live in, I know it's one of the most invidious questions in journalism, what the fans think, because they're a large mass, I'm one. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There are no crowds at the ground to sing their frustration or their happiness. So all I can give you is an estimate. And I think that while everybody will have an opinion based upon that age-old hoary question of nobody's bigger than the club, that will be at the heart of the debate. My opinion is that the things that they've, not just the trophies that have been brought, the things they've seen Messi do in their colours over the years will mean that by an overwhelming majority, people will either support Messi or tolerate him. I think you also have to take into account that they've watched for themselves, the majority of the fans, the misappropriation of the Cruyff, Begiristain, Guardiola legacy and the mishandling of the transfer market, and a deep suspicion that there is no good reason for Barcelona to be in the situation of debt that they are right now, nor a good reason for them to have failed so spectacularly in football terms, both in terms of the last coach that they appointed and several of the most recent signings. So overall, whether that would be instantly the case if you had a snap poll right in the middle of the last 2 weeks, whether everybody would be in favour of Messi or not, okay, that's a different question. Overall, they owe him so much. That was a bad expression. They love him. And love means forgiving.
Greg, can we talk about what the actual team might look like? Let's say they don't get a deal done, right? And they don't take that money off the wage bill, because there's a strong possibility that that does happen as well. What will Ronald Koeman's team look like when the transfer window closes, do you think?
It's one of the exciting things. It shouldn't have taken him to be the first to say the Emperor's got no clothes on. But before he signed, he was pointing out De Jong's been playing in the wrong position. Griezmann's been playing in the wrong position. Now, that sounds, the cat sat on the mat in football terms, because we could all see it. But thank the Lord, he's come out and said it. And therefore, what we are aware is that De Jong playing in the formation that Koeman used at Holland and that was predominantly used in De Jong's breakthrough years at Ajax was 4-2-3-1, with De Jong in the middle of the two organising, slots, either with Pjanic or Busquets next to him, and then some agglomeration of Ansu maybe on the left, Messi at 10, Griezmann on the right coming onto his left foot where he can happily play, and a striker. So Ansu can become the 9. That's a 17-year-old who's still quite slight, irrespective of his talent and pace, being asked to do things that, for example, hold the ball up with his back to goal isn't in his repertoire because he's so small. But he can play in certain games where you're going forward and you're not asked to hold the ball. Maybe you're playing away from home and slightly on the counter. Ansu at 9 makes perfect sense. They're trying to sign Depay. In my opinion, whether he's elite footballer or not, I suspect his character is going to find it hard at Football Club Barcelona. And I suspect that he's not a Xavi Victor Font player. So in a year's time, when they come in as a partnership, the pile will be dispensed with. So my opinion is it'll be 4-2-3-1. I've named most of the positions. I think they'd like to replace Semedo if they can. I think that's right to do. Of course, they'll be starting the season with Neto in goals, not Ter Stegen. He's had an operation on his knee. He'll miss 8-9 weeks, I think. So the one thing that's probably left is that Bartomeu is absolutely, utterly determined to get rid of Suarez. It's nearly done to Juventus. I think it's a bad mistake. A rejuvenated team doing the running for Suarez as the one forward in a 4-2-3-1 would probably, in my opinion, would leave Suarez with a 20-goal season and the end of his contract. But Bartomeu is effectively what's going on. Bartomeu isn't making football judgment on Suarez at 9, that one position left open for discussion. And they can't afford Lautaro Martinez at the moment unless there's some massive change of policy on behalf of Inter about taking swap deals or whatever. Anyway, at any rate, Bartomeu is saying, I want the club back. I'm the president. The club no longer belongs to Messi and Suarez. I'm going to break Suarez off from Messi at the hip and send him away. And It's become a purge, and I think it's a big mistake.
If the Messi deal does go through, and does that then automatically mean that more people come in, or is it actually just a bam on the financial fire that they have in the background?
Yeah, Jerry, look, I don't know. It's so speculative that all I'm saying is that window is not closed, and we'd be dull if we didn't note it. If for some reason the deal were to happen and he went to Manchester City, there would be a freeing up of cash. But if it happened, at what stage in the market, who would be available? Their mega goal is to bring Lautaro Martinez, a goal scorer, and get rid of Suarez. If Messi suddenly wasn't there, would Lautaro be as keen to come? I don't know the answer to that question, but would they have much more money? Yes, they would.
That makes sense.
One of the elements of this now is going to be Ronald Koeman and trying to stamp his things, stamp his own philosophy on things. And is it too simple to say that, the Gini Wijnaldum links that are now present in the media is a Ronald Koeman crusade, that the influx of transfers that might happen before the end of the window is going to be the sign of Ronald Koeman saying, I'm not just here until Xavi comes in, I'm here for the long haul?
He's got a big voice. He's got a bigger voice than coaches would normally have had back as far as Guardiola, really, because since then, the coach at Barcelona would have a voice, and I want this type of player, please. And then the football director would go and put names and prices and profiles and ages to that. Now Koeman does have Bartomeu and Ramon Plan as the technical director. If not over a barrel, then quite close to it. He's bailed them out. They need him. They can't be affording sacking somebody else or somebody else quitting on them mid-season. And they're in Bartomeu's last year, where he wants to create enough of a role of goodwill. Good luck with that, Joseph Maria. Such that one of his candidates can win the elections whenever they are. So, he'll have a voice, and Wijnaldum could play at 10 if Messi wasn't there. Wijnaldum could play in behind Depay. Of course he could.
Can I ask about Madrid and the situation there? Because we've been hearing that the transfer market is completely skewed by COVID and the fears of many clubs that they're not going to have match day income, and really interested to see exactly how TV deals are going to be reconstituted over the next year. So there's been in some instances, there's been a battening down of the hatches. Jurgen Klopp, obviously, having a go at the oligarchs and the state-owned clubs for continuing to spend. Real Madrid, not quite a state-owned club. Sometimes they write the rules as if they were, but we haven't really seen them invest massively in this window. Is that simply to do with the global economic situation? Was that always planned? What is the scenario there? Do they have any cash that they're sitting on waiting for a deal later in the market?
I believe my connection dropped. I believe you're talking about Real Madrid, and it's a policy decision with them. And if you're trying to understand Real Madrid, then you have to begin at the fact that they have a bloated squad, not only bloated in numbers, but giant amassment of talent. And Zidane doesn't want to work with a 32, 33-man squad. Nobody in the modern game does. They talk about short squads, long squads. The fact is that Madrid probably want to be working with a hardcore of 21, 22 footballers. And I think that it's really important to understand that Madrid are a selling club at the moment. They've raised about 65, 70 million in terms of getting people out. And they most certainly want another 4 or 5 players out in this market, at which point I refer you back to your idea about, if Messi was on the wage bill, would Barcelona be able to spend more? Madrid are largely being touted, which is a market tactic, as not spending anything in this market, so that people's expectations are going down. If they suddenly come knocking in the last week of the market, people aren't going to massively inflate the prices. The idea is to sell to buy, but sell in order to make the squad leaner, because Zidane runs a happy training ground, and what he does not want is 5 or 6 players, including Gareth Bale, lounging around, knowing that they don't have to put in massive effort at Valdebelis every working day because they're not going to play at the weekend. That's anathema to every leading coach.
Bale and the suggestion in the paper today that they're going to actually spend money to pay half his wages. This is what we've seen with various clubs trying to get people off the wage bill, like Alexis Sanchez. Has it reached that point where they're essentially paying a club to take Gareth Bale off their hands?
Well, the argument is about whether Bale gets paid up for the remainder of his contract, which would be a larger sum than, for example, splitting a season 50-50 on his wages. So as bizarre as it sounds, punting out, what would the sum be? He's on about 17 net of taxes, that's 34. So if the taxes are picked up by the club that takes Bale, you're talking about something in the region of 8.5 or 9 for a season, compared to paying up a couple of seasons at 17 million plus tax that Bale is still due. So the argument isn't about really whether Bale wants to leave or whether Real Madrid want him out. It's about on what terms. Now, without being harsh on Bale, who I've defended on this show in the past, where I felt that his impact and the importance that he had in winning trophies, not just for winning goals, was being underestimated in some degree in Britain and Ireland. Now, I despair of him a little bit. He is at an age where he can still be dominant. Athletically, he's still in good shape. He says he misses playing football. He comes alive, or tries to, when he's playing for Wales. For him to realise the remaining potential in his career, and I think there's still a lot of it, he has to play. And he and his agent need to give up on this, well, we're not moving unless you pay us up the remaining couple of years of our contract. He's vastly wealthy. It's inane, in my book, that you prioritise a certain sum of money over a couple of years, whereby if you don't use them well, you'll never get them back. The money can come again in future, through advertising, through sponsorship, through whatever you like. So I wish Jonathan Barnett would give his client different advice.
Graham Hunter, thanks a million for taking the call this morning. Best of luck with the new house.
Thanks, lads.
Graham Hunter there on the line. Time for the sports pages.
OTB AM.
OTBsports.com this morning leads with Mark Lawrenson and a quote there saying Klopp and Liverpool are just playing a waiting game. That's with regards to transfers. Andy Mitten, meanwhile, was back on the show last night talking about the renewal of the Sancho to Manchester United move. Sancho is a star, he said. Manchester United needs star players. Meanwhile, there was always an angle with him. This is a piece around Ger Loughnan's genius. And Newcastle say Premier League acted inappropriately during the takeover bid. Meanwhile, Chelsea are in talks to sign Rennes keeper Edouard Mendy. So that'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on if they want to get a new keeper to start ahead of Kepa. Right, starting with the newspapers then. The back page of the Irish Daily Mail leads with Jurgen Klopp's quotes on BBC Radio yesterday. Klopp's drop, Chelsea and City spending irks Reds boss. We'll come back to that in a moment. The main picture there on the back of the Daily Mail is a picture of Sam Bennett and Caleb Ewan going head-to-head down the home stretch yesterday. It was almost back-to-back stages for Sam Bennett yesterday, pipped at the post by Caleb Ewan, but overall a great day for Sam Bennett with Peter Sagan getting essentially docked points in the race for green. Back of the Irish Independent this morning leads with Colm Keys' piece here that the battle for the €40 million COVID fund begins. Applications have to be in by Monday and there will be a response on Friday week to see who gets the money. 40 million quid, as I say, between the three major sports bodies, the IRFU, the GEA and the FAI. Meanwhile, John Caulfield has said critics never wanted Kenny to get the job. He's been speaking on the LOI Weekly podcast and he said, do I think Stephen can get a job with Ireland? Can do a job with Ireland and do it very well? Absolutely I do, but we have a big game against Slovakia and if we don't qualify, well then he's going to be under pressure because there's a brigade out there who want him out and never really wanted him in the first place. James Ducker, meanwhile, reporting that United agree Sancho terms. He reports that there is a breakthrough in the impasse over wages and agents' fees. Although, as Christian Falk was telling us on the show yesterday, that might not be the end of it because it's a transfer fee that is actually going to cause one of the many stumbling blocks in that Manchester United may not be willing to pay 120 million quid for Jadon Sancho. Back of the Irish Daily Star this morning is playing cash up. Nev urges Reds to back Ole in transfer market. Gary Neville putting the blame for United's average season, which hasn't even started yet, firmly at the door of Ed Woodward rather than Ole Gunnar Solskjaer already. So he's setting his stall out before the season begins. And Klopp's pop at Blues, which we'll come back to in just a moment. The Herald Give him chance is the headline here. This is John Caulfield again. Kenny critics never wanted him, he says, and battle on for share of €40 million COVID fund. The back of the Irish Sun. He's gonna face the music. Mason set for tough questions from Solskjaer as he returns to Manchester United training. Mike in Suplot, meanwhile, furious Mike Ashley is threatening to sue the Premier League bosses for rejecting Newcastle's Saudi-backed takeover. And perch and destroy. Gary Neville warned Liverpool they risk being knocked off their perch if they do not make a major transfer this summer. The Irish Mirror, meanwhile, Dread Devils is their headline. Gary Neville's quotes leading the way here. Ole has got no chance of catching top two unless United give him support. They have not yet signed any of the players he clearly needs. So that is the back of the Irish Mirror this morning. The Irish Times leads with John O'Sullivan's statistics piece. The numbers just keep adding up in Leinster's unbeaten streak. Cullen's side have scored 5 or more tries in 12 of the 24 games in their run. Jerry Thornley, meanwhile, reporting on Owen Farrell's 5-match ban. Maybe it's time Farrell, Jones and England brought it down a notch, he suggests. The Irish Examiner then leads with Tommy Martin's column, the return of his column, I think, this week. Premier League Dream Machine faces its toughest test. A great piece there about Leeds United in the build-up to their first game in the Premier League for a long, long time. Meanwhile, Simon Lewis is talking about Connor's vital cog in Leinster Machine and boost for Bennett's green claims as Sagan hit with penalty. A couple of the UK back pages, actually the Racing Post in there first as well. One day only, Doncaster goes straight back behind closed doors, and Brady hunches the back page there. American up for test is their story on the US Open. The London Times goes with a headline here that reads, delay in fans returning will destroy clubs. Dismayed reviews of supporters coming back. It almost feels like the UK are in that week at the moment where we were maybe 3-4 weeks ago, where there was uproar from the GAA in particular about a scaling back of supporters coming into grounds. The planned date in the UK of return of fans currently is October the 1st, but there is some suggestion now that that is going to be pushed back. Richard Masters did an interview yesterday. He talks about a £1.25 billion financial black hole if restrictions on fans continue. He says that it will be £700 million from last season and then £547 million from this season, based on stadiums being 25% full. So he is actually factoring in the fact that there will be losses if you can get quarter of the fans in there. And there's talks here about League One and League Two, that they may be forced into another spell of hibernation if no fans are allowed back. And I guess that's where they're at the moment. It doesn't look great in terms of supporters getting back in. And that is the main story on the front of the Daily Telegraph sports section. Sport in danger of being killed off. Government warned October 1st date for return of fans is crucial, and surprise review imposes crowd limit of 1,000 on pilot. And the back of the Guardian is Newcastle take legal advice over rejection of Saudi-led bid. Southgate says players' hotel incident affected tactics, and Williams battles back to seal place in semi-finals. You were watching some of Serena last night, Ger?
Yeah, she wasn't great. Looked a bit tired. Was up against somebody who hadn't played any significant tennis for 3 years, and obviously we talked about this last week. Really want her to knock Margaret Court off her perch. I'm not sure it's going to happen this week. The semi-finals and finals are going to be very difficult for her at this point. There are, tennis players in form who are much younger and who have no real fear of this version of Serena Williams. So, at the same time, this is we're coming towards the end of her career. So it's worth digging these matches out if you can.
Yeah, and chasing a record, I think everybody wants to see that happen when it comes to tennis Grand Slams especially, but particularly when she's about to knock Margaret Court off her perch. That probably adds an added incentive for the neutral viewer.
Yeah, of course. I'm not going to lie, I haven't always tuned in when Serena has been playing in quarterfinals that you would expect her to win, but she was a set down. I was like, oh, I might actually just tune in for this, and she dug it out, and there was some really good tennis played. So I think I'm definitely going to watch the semi-final tonight, and if she wins that, 100% she'll nip the final. But she's found the last couple of Grand Slams where this has been an opportunity for her, just that bridge too far. So I wonder, the psychology of trying to become the most winning I think she's probably already the greatest tennis player of all time, given the level of competition that she faced. But you need to do it in records. Like Jack Nicklaus still has more than Tiger Woods, and so those debates that rage on, when you can point to the number of wins, it's kind of hard to debunk those, right?
For sure. It is 4 minutes past 9, by the way. Let's move on to Sam Bennett. Another great day for him yesterday. We're into stage 12 today, and with Peter Sagan's points deduction yesterday, things are looking extremely rosy in the garden of Sam Bennett at this point, to say the least. I think we tend to engage with this story with a bit of caution, and we have tended to do that over the last little while, because there has just generally been a sense that Sagan might actually come roaring back into things. But Sam Bennett is now on 243 points at the top of the points classification in this year's Tour de France. Peter Sagan is on 175 points. That is a massive gap. There are, 10 days left in the Tour de France. This is incredible. This is like a higher wire act, because he's a sprinter. There is a chance that it could all go wrong at any moment, but it's gone also very well for him, especially this week.
You get 50 points for winning each stage. You get 30 points for finishing second, 20 for third, and then it goes down 2 points. But there's also intermediate sprints on stages where you can pick up 20 points. So the gap can be made up in one day if Sam Bennett finished out of the points and Sagan won an intermediate sprint and then won the stage. It's just there aren't that many stages left where the sprinters are actually going to have the opportunity to win. So if you can just keep that gap for another couple of days, you'd feel pretty confident that the opportunities to make them up aren't going to be there. So today, what are we at? Today is Thursday the 10th. At the hilly stage, the hilly stage means that there's a Category 2 climb about 20 kilometres from the end. And that is traditionally, according to the Tour de France website, these are the stages where you see somebody break away. They get away from the peloton. It's nobody who has any interest in the yellow jersey or general classification. Everybody lets him go, and he rides to glory, and either they track him down or they don't. And if they don't track him down, he wins the stage. And if they do track him down, then it is a bunch stage finish. So there's a possibility today ends up as a bunch finish. But then it's mountain, rest day, mountain, mountain, mountain. Yeah. And there's a flat stage, and then time trial, and then we're over. So it's like he's Sunday week. This whole thing finishes. Not much to hold at bay, but the glory of the Tour de France is that so much changes in a single stage in a single day. We know he's a hardy bastard because he finished. He was the Lanterne Rouge, the last place finisher in the Tour de France with injury. So Sam Bennett's going to finish this out. I think, barring a horrific injury, we can be confident of that. He's got the stickiness, and this is his time. It just feels like everything is building towards this. So, we were looking back before the show started this morning at the number of points that it takes to win. And, Sagan has been such a dominant figure. His points total when he wins has been in the 400s a lot of the time. But as low as 370 has also won it. So there's not a whole heap for Sam Bennett to get to be the person who has already eclipsed the figure that everybody finishes second on in recent years. That's not a guarantee you're going to win, that whole magical 40 points nonsense that we talk about the Premier League. But look, it's looking pretty good. The reason it's looking good is because Sagan got deducted points yesterday, even though he finished third. Yeah. And he got deducted his points for a shoulder charge. So that was like super bonus extra 30 points.
Exactly. You kind of need these things to fall your way, I'd imagine, if you're going to knock off the best guy in the world at what he does. Just to put it, looking at this in a very rudimentary way, the stage yesterday had one category climb. It was Category 4 climb, so it wasn't massive. Hence, we had a sprint finish involving the sprinters. There's only one, as you were mentioning there, only one stage left that resembles that, and that is tomorrow week. That is really it. Today there's a couple of big climbs. There's a Category 2 climb. It's not the big climbs. They go up to Colombier, I think, at some point this weekend, on Sunday, and it actually finishes on La Colombier, which is going to be incredible. But even just from the perspective of watching this, I'm not going to lie, when I would look at the flat stages in previous years, I'd be like, well, I'm not watching that today. I'm not going to bother watching that because I want to see the GC and I want to see these incredible summit finishes like we're going to get on Sunday. Whereas now I'm kind of I'm looking forward to seeing that stage tomorrow week, if they're still in the mix, because as you point out there, the winner of that stage is probably going to be chasing the green jersey, and that's where the big points can get made up.
Yeah, and I think we should point out that Peter Sagan is the greatest sprinter in the history of the Tour de France, all the way back to the very start. I think the 50s they started giving out the green jersey, but since then, nobody has won 7. He's won 7. And he's won 7 out of the last 8. The other people who won it, Mark Cavendish won it before he won his first, and Michael Matthews won it in 2017. You were saying there was some reason Sagan didn't compete that year or was injured or something. This is all-time great. He is the best at this. There's never been anybody better than him. And Sam Bennett has a lead. That's a good, strong lead, and beat him yesterday. Even if Sagan hadn't been disqualified or knocked back, he wasn't disqualified, obviously, had his points removed from yesterday, he was beaten by our boy. So,
but that 2017 thing, do you remember? Well, I remember we did a piece on the evening show about that Sagan disqualification in 2017. It was actually Mark Cavendish. Sagan elbows him off the track. Cavendish goes flying into the crowd, and Sagan gets kicked out of the tour full stop at that point. Outside of that, he probably would have won them all, you know?
Yeah, I mean, couldn't happen to a nicer fella. Like, that only makes me like Peter Sagan even more.
I'm loving this, the sort of the way we're digging into the psychology of Peter Sagan over the last few weeks. The psychology of the Slovakian sporting nation as well. This is the thing we need to focus on. Just one last thing before we wrap up the stories this morning. Klopp's drop is the back of the Irish Daily Mail, which is the newspaper that's leading with the story this morning. It's across the papers. Chelsea and City spending irks Reds boss Jurgen Klopp has done an interview with Kelly Cates for BBC Radio 5 Live, and he's had a bit of a pop off Chelsea. And I'm liking this little bit of tension that's simmering here between Frank Lampard and Jurgen Klopp. They play each other on Sunday week. We live in a world at the moment with a lot of uncertainty, said Klopp. For some clubs, it seems less important how uncertain the future is. Owned by countries, owned by oligarchs. That's the truth. We are a different kind of club, said Jurgen Klopp. Would you say, Jurgen, that this means more potentially? Is that the difference? We got to the Champions League final 2 years ago, he says. We won it last year. We became Premier League champions last season by being the club we are. We cannot change it overnight and say, now we want to behave like Chelsea. They are signing a lot of players. That can be an advantage, but that means they have to fit together. You cannot bring in the 11 best players in the world and just hope a week later they play the best football. It's about working on the training ground. That will probably be an advantage for us. We've worked quite a while with each other. Now, he's right about that second thing. You can't just throw all these players together and hope that they're going to fit. But to say that they are a million miles apart from big spending teams just simply isn't true. Obviously, they're not owned by a country or an oligarch, so to speak, but they've got a very expensive centre-back and a very expensive goalkeeper.
Yeah, is he ratcheting up the pressure here on the young manager that was giving him a lot of grief, giving it a big one just because he won one? Like, that tension between those two is actually going to be great to watch.
Yeah.
And here is Klopp, very cold, callous, surgically ratcheting up the tension on Frank Lampard. And, I'm here for that.
Yeah, so am I. I'm all up for this. And like Frank Lampard with his little smirk before he launches into a verbal tirade, I'm looking for the rebuke to the rebuke that's coming up soon. This is going to be a fascinating couple of days. Like, let's not forget that it's Klopp against Bielsa on week 1, Klopp against Lampard in week 2. Like, the cult of the manager is only getting bigger and bigger in the Premier League, and hopefully we've got a bit of biting back from Lampard and maybe a little bit of needle from Bielsa this week. Who knows what he's going to say in his pre-match press conference. Right, let's have a look at... Sorry, go on.
I don't think Bielsa... he doesn't need to. He's got the whole world on his side. If he starts biting at managers, that'll be not great for his brand. West Brom and Leicester live at 2 o'clock on Sunday. Stephen Doyle and Kenny Cunningham on duty for that one. And Spurs against Everton. Who is the best right back in Ireland? Well, it's going to be decided once and for all. It's celebrity deathmatch. 4:30. Nathan Murphy and Brian Kerr on commentary duty for that one.
I can't wait for Serge Aurier to start ahead of Matt Doherty or something now at the weekend, and Seamus Coleman to also be on the bench. Right, let's have a look at the OTB Sports app this morning. Got all the latest articles there, from Brian O'Driscoll to Jadon Sancho news, quotes from Mark Lawrence ahead of the new season as well. The radio tab there, you can listen to us live every morning or watch us live every morning on the video tab, and all our podcasts, countless podcasts for you every single day. The OTB Sports app is available now, and it's the first place to get all that good stuff first. Right, it is 9:13 on this Thursday morning. Up next, we'll preview the NFL season with Mike Carlson, but watch out here during the break for a sneak peek at the next instalment of Andy Lee Meets with Dermot Whelan during the ad break.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
The OTB Brief. Everything you need to know about sport every morning. Need to get on top of the day's sports news? Well, the OTB Brief is the only sports update you'll need every morning. With all the breaking stories, post-match reaction.
It is a loss, there's no question. We're going to have to adapt as best we can.
And the best bits from off the ball, all in a 10-minute podcast.
I tried to view the lockdown as, I tried to see a silver lining and say this is my opportunity to work on my weaknesses.
The OTB Brief. Weekday mornings from 7:20 a.m. on OTB Sports Radio. Listen on the OTB Sports app.
Dermot, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks a million, Andy. Loved it.
Well, it's going to be pre-interview.
Oh, shit.
You are listening to Andy Lee Meets in association with SAYAT. I'm here with Dermot Whelan and we're talking about meditation, something I've tried but struggled to get into.
Off the ball.
I'll never forget it. There was a lot of snow on the ground. 1962 was a bad winter. And my first recollection of it is picking the ball up and nutmegging the late Jack Charlton, knocking it through his legs, and Jack booted me up in the air. And I was lying in the snow. And he looked down and says, "Don't do that to me again, you little..."
Is that where Don Reevy came up with that line then, that if you were walking in snow you wouldn't leave a footprint?
Well, I've tried it many times, it's no work.
Off the ball. Weeknights from 7 and weekends from 1.
This is OTB Sports Radio. Live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
All right, the NFL is back tonight and Mike Carlson is back with us here on OTB AM. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning. I was just meditating on the Tour de France.
No better way to meditate.
One of the greatest things I've ever done was cover the Tour de France. It was fantastic.
Right.
It's absolutely amazing.
What for the entire tour, or was it a particular section?
Just a particular section. When we had some I went down to sort out some problems with the organizers, but I got to ride in the caravan of cars behind the peloton, which go down the mountains or up the mountains as well, two abreast on these little mountain roads. And then when someone in the peloton needs help and signals, their team car pulls into the middle and everybody else goes to the outside and the team car goes up the middle. And if you're on the outside, you're looking right down the side of the mountain. And it was like, get me out of here, But it's an amazing event. It's like an Olympic Games. It just consumes you totally for 2 weeks.
Will said here, Ger and I both been very fortunate enough to get over to the Tour de France. And the year I was there, a car actually went over that side that you're speaking about, Mike. And thankfully everybody was okay in it. But those drops are ginormous. They're terrifying. And somebody actually drove right off it at a hairpin bend. It's crazy. Yeah. We must catch up on your cycling history some other time, but tonight it is very much Kansas City Chiefs against Houston Texans. It's 1:20 Irish time if you're up for staying late or getting up for it. It's hard to know how things are going to pan out, Mike. My theory is that, I guess, we've got a very clear number one team in the NFL here. We've got a superstar in Patrick Mahomes, and it doesn't help the chasing pack that preseason has been stymied a little bit.
It doesn't help much of anybody, really. And I'm not convinced the Chiefs are a clear number one, not even in the AFC, where I think the Ravens are probably going to give them a good run. But the two of them are certainly ahead of the rest of the pack. And Houston is the kind of team you'd expect would have more problems than most because, obviously, trading away DeAndre Hopkins, Bill O'Brien's trying to institute a sort of new sort of offense with lots of receivers that he can throw to rather than concentrating on DeAndre all the time. He's also got to kind of break in a new running back in David Johnson, who has not been the same David Johnson since his knee injury. And you just wonder how that all is going to work because, like every team, they haven't had much chance to try it out under contact, under game conditions, which is really the only way you find out about individual players, the way you find out about how your schemes work. And, I just wonder if they're going to be ready. Kansas City, on the other hand, returned most of their team. If Duvernay Tardif hadn't stayed in Canada, work in hospitals, basically, he opted out of the season. And Damian Williams, the tailback, opted out of the season, but they've got a rookie tailback. Clive Edwards-Hilaire to take his place, but you don't know how that's going to work out. And you'll be reliant, I suppose, on Mahomes, but if you have to be reliant on somebody, that's a pretty good guy to be reliant on.
How big an issue is that of teams being affected by the pandemic, of players opting out? Are Kansas City relatively unscathed, relatively speaking?
Yeah, they should be able to replace one guard. They've got kind of 3 candidates. I'm not sure who's going to win. A couple of teams have been very heavily affected, especially, I think, the Patriots, who lost 4 more or less key players, including one of their tight ends, who they still don't have a replacement for, but 3 defensive starters. And when you looked at the other starters, who they've lost in free agency, their defense is basically like a college team that's graduated all their lettermen and having to build from scratch. The secondary is more intact than the front 7. But I think that, as much as, if not more than Tom Brady's loss, is going to be the factor that makes this season difficult for the Patriots.
How good is Cam Newton going to be? If he's fit, is it possible he's back to MVP level? And is the very notion of him being fit actually ridiculous in and of itself?
That's the whatever it is they gave him to play, $7 million question, I guess. He's a bargain. If he's back to his form, MVP form, when they went to the Super Bowl, that would be huge, because it would open up things for their offense. Right now, their whole running game is questionable, and they don't have a great group of receivers for him. So the running threat of Cam would add something. If he's back to where he was 2 years ago when Carolina went 6-2 in the first half of the season, and Cam was remarkably efficient as a quarterback, that would be fine with them too. I suspect that the answer is going to be somewhere in the middle. And if he is fit, they're probably not going to want to risk him running the ball a whole lot, but they're going to use that kind of threat of options a little bit to take pressure off him. Their offensive line is probably back to where it expects to be. And to me, the question is whether they'll actually be able to put up enough points to get teams to chase them, in which case having the great secondary that they do will come into play a lot more than it would if teams can keep the ball on the ground against them. You think back to when they were beaten in the playoffs by the Titans, and that's basically what the Titans did.
Mike, we started the show this morning by asking the question, which of the Glazers sports franchises were more likely to be hoisting a trophy at the end of the year? The odds with the bookmakers are fairly similar. It's 11-1, I think, for the Bucks, and 12-1 for Manchester United to be winning the Premier League. What's your take on that? The Glazers know how to invest, and they've done really well with Tampa.
Yeah, they've had. This is it's almost a new thing with them. And, I think they benefited from taking advantage of a good situation whereby signing Tom Brady. And I think he's won the quarterback controversy in Tampa, and he's likely to start with Brady and then Gronk coming along for the ride, as it were. And they were smart in hiring Bruce Arians, and not least because Todd Bowles came in that deal, basically. Having lost the Jets head coaching job. He was the defensive coordinator for Arians in Arizona in days when they kept Arizona in games when, after Carson Palmer had got hurt, after his fill-in had got hurt, they didn't have much of quarterback, but they were able to keep in a lot of games in that division. They ran Seattle tough a number of years there. And I respect his coordinator ability a lot, and they've got some real talent on defense too. I think signing Leonard Fournette when he became a free agent with the mismanaged, shall we say, Jacksonville Jaguars, got the bookies to put the odds down a bit lower, and for good reason, because Fournette in this offense could become a real threat. He could be what we've expected him to be throughout his NFL career. They've got a slight problem now in that Mike Evans appears to have done his hamstring again. And I'm not sure how long he's going to be out. They don't really have, it's hard to have a replacement for Mike Evans. They don't really have a solid number 3 receiver. They were looking at Miller as a slot guy. But they do have 3 tight ends, including Gronk, who can catch the ball. So you might see some other stranger alignments from them. The big thing with Brady, we've all been saying for months now, is that Arians loves longer, slower developing pass plays. And Brady obviously is not the most mobile guy in the world. He's very good at making time for himself by moving a step here or there in the pocket. But in the last few years, his tendency has been not to stand in to make the slower developing throw. If he's under pressure, he gives it up rather than risk a bad throw. Now, how that's going to pan out, whether Bruce Arians is going to change his style a bit, which I think he will, given that he's got 3 tight ends who can catch the ball, and go with more shorter developing plays, more precision plays, that would make a lot of sense to me, because you look at the way Kansas City uses the tight ends. There's a couple of other teams that use the tight ends, the 49ers being a good example. I think he'll see that and see there's real potential there with O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate and Gronk as guys who can stretch the field in multiple directions. I don't know if it makes up for Mike Evans' loss, but I don't think that's going to set them back terribly for the short term.
Yeah, the Fournette signing, great news for Tampa Bay Buccaneers, terrible news for any fantasy leagues that drafted 2 weeks ago before the trade actually happened, because he's going to have a lot of competition to get on that ball. Like, if we're talking about Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski here, like, surely you look at these guys and say, as the season wears on, they can't possibly produce the sort of output that we were used to 5-6 years ago. We surely can't see that again, Mike, or can we?
Well, last year was an anomaly for Brady. I think he was unhappy. Their offensive line wasn't good. His receiving core wasn't good. It was a huge disappointment. And I think you could see that both in the way that they played and also in his willingness to leave New England, which I remember coming on this show after the season and thinking he would probably stay as they rebuilt. What they needed last year, they were a 7-9 team, and if you take away the turnovers, not just interceptions, but Jameis was also a guy who was vulnerable in the pocket because he didn't have a good sense of where the rush was coming from. So you got a lot of fumbles as well. If you took away the fumbles and the interceptions, they're probably at least a 10-6 team, just like that, because they gave away a lot of games in the late stages of games. Now, obviously, you also can't say that without saying, okay, we're going to take away some of the touchdown passes. But Tom Brady threw, 24, I think, last year or the year before. If Brady gives them 24 touchdown passes and only throws 6 or 9 interceptions instead of 30 and 30, they're way ahead of the game, which is why I think that they will be serious contenders in the South. I don't think they're as good a team right now as New Orleans is in that first game. That game on Sunday night is going to be a great one, Tampa and New Orleans. And we talk a lot about Brady being past it, but Drew Brees is 41 years old and missed 5 games last year where Teddy Bridgewater quarterbacked. It's going to be a kind of old timers night. I'm not sure. I should have checked this before I started talking. Whether 43 and 41 is the oldest. I think it was Brady and Josh McCown who set the record for the oldest total combined age of 2 starting quarterbacks in an NFL game. But 84 has got to be up there.
It really does. I think the previous record actually is set by Brady and Rivers. So I think this one would surpass it. At least that's just from a very.
Rivers is still in there too.
Yeah, obviously, but Rivers is 38 now, 37 at this point. So this is it. We're seeing records getting broken. Jerry, you were making the point earlier on that like the QBs around the league are incredible. Like how quickly has this happened, Mike? Is this because you'd certainly be talking about crisis mode in that position quite regularly 2-3 years ago at this point. It now seems all of a sudden, I'm not sure, has offensive coordination just got a lot better, where they're recognising how to utilise their QB best, or what's the reason for this?
Well, I think in one sense there's an exaggeration in that if you look at teams with quarterback decisions to make, like Dak Prescott, whose contract is going to expire in Dallas and needs an extension. The longer Jerry Jones waits, the more expensive he's going to get. There's a group of quarterbacks, which is about 10 deep, who are way ahead of the other 20. So a premium, I don't like to use the word elite now, but a premium quarterback is still a difficult thing to find. But I think what's happened is that And the NFL has adjusted gradually to the changes in college football, notably the spread formations. And that has opened the game up a bit to more college-style quarterbacks. And, now when you see Cliff Kingsbury coaching in Arizona and you see Matt Rule getting the job in Carolina, these are guys who are being hired particularly for that kind of ability. And the interesting thing was this whole system, it's not new in college football, but it's developed slowly by smaller college teams. And Kingsbury and Rule had great success in college to an extent, but that was great success was merely treading water against the really big teams. These systems were designed to be able to overcome teams that had a big talent advantage against you, to take advantage of what you could do. And as they've been adapted in the NFL, they've created really interesting situations that talented young quarterbacks can come in and take advantage of right away. And I think what you look at is a guy like Jared Goff, who maybe 10 years ago would have come in the league and be drifting around like a Kyle Bowler or somebody like that. But because Sean McVay was coaching and because he had all of these concepts that he'd added to the NFL offense from these kind of college ideas, he's able to mold Jared Goff to the point where he's efficient, sometimes really good, but you can obviously see where his problems might have been before. And, I love the idea of that with Lamar Jackson, say we've got a running option quarterback again. There's always the risk in the NFL because defenses are so much better and players, every player has a certain higher level of skill than most college teams, that injury is always a worry. We saw that with RG3, for example. His career was sidetracked basically by injury, taking away his mobility. In Houston, they've tried to keep Deshaun Watson from doing that much running. Cam Newton is another obvious example. Colin Kaepernick did get injured, and played really well in San Francisco, but he hasn't played in 4 years for other reasons. So, I like the variety that you're seeing now. Tennessee is an old-fashioned run the ball first, grind it out, win by defense kind of team. Baltimore is an option running attack, which you probably 5 years ago wouldn't have thought you'd see again in the NFL. Arizona is going to be a wide open air raid offense, and I love that variety. That opens up avenues for quarterbacks who can be well coached, who have talent and can be well coached. But for every Pat Mahomes, there's a Mitch Trubisky.
Well, yeah. Well, look, who knows where Trubisky's going to end up this season. Styles make fight, so it's going to be a great season in that term. One last question, Mike. The prospect of games being stopped for COVID looms very large, given the close proximity that it's essentially 80 people in the building and the facilities when you include the practice squad and the 53-man roster. So, I mean, look, we're hoping that this season progresses and that everybody is smart and doesn't go out to clubs late at night and doesn't breathe in the fumes of other people. And, but I mean, that's not going to happen, is it?
I don't think so. I think it's almost unavoidable. The last set of testing that they did, only one player apparently had tested positive, but a number of ancillary staff had done. And that's part of the problem. And been saying it for a long time. Even beyond the players on the field, you don't want them going out and spreading infection in their wider communities, within the team, within the families, within the friends. It comes very, very quickly. And you don't have a bubble situation, obviously, in the sense that everybody's bubbled the way basketball can do because there's so many fewer players involved. And you can only do what you can do with your team. Given that they're young, healthy players, you might see a lot of asymptomatic people for a while. But given that they have a lot of players who are either black and or very big, and those are two particularly vulnerable categories of people with higher levels of infection rates. I think they need to be very, very careful. And I really think that it's only going to take one or two clusters of infection around the league to then make people take things much more, or reconsider, say. They've added to the practice squad so that they can bring new guys in. But at some point, if the integrity of the competition starts to suffer, that's going to be as big or almost as big a consideration for the league as the possibility of wider spread of infection. The two things together could well be some sort of knockout punch. Maybe you pause the season for a few weeks and then you restart. I mean, I don't know, but there's an awful lot of impetus to keep the season going right now. There's an awful lot of celebration that the season is going, but we are walking a tightrope.
Well, enjoy the season for as long as it lasts, Mike.
I hope so.
Thanks a million for joining us this morning. We'll chat to you again soon.
Thanks, Ian.
Mike Carlson there on the line, running the rule over the NFL, which begins tonight. 1:20 is the kickoff time for Texans against the Chiefs tonight. A great fixture to get things underway. The snap, by the way, is live on Friday afternoon. Ger, Keane and Ronan giving their expert views, reaction to that. Are you going to stay up tonight, Ger? Is that the thing you do on opening night?
No. 1:30 kickoffs. The Thursday night kickoffs you can't watch them.
No, the highlight.
Thursday kickoffs, can't watch the late nights.
What do you do? I know. Like, is it very quickly? Is it the highlights you watch? Do you record the whole game?
No, YouTube highlights are amazing. The NFL's official YouTube channel puts up, and they don't tell you the score either.
Yeah.
So you can watch, and it's like there are different versions of it. So I think there's a 15-minute condensed game, and it's astonishingly good. I mean, obviously, the first thing you do is you check your fantasy score, Owen. So that's the first thing you do.
Obviously,
you don't even need to see the highlights. You just need to go, how did Deshaun Watson and Will Fuller get on? That's all I care about, really.
All right, we are just about done this morning. We do have one special piece yet to come, I should say. But just to let you know, first of all, what's coming up today on OTB Sports Radio. We've got Barry Ryan, who wrote the book The Ascent. That's on OTB Gold from 1 o'clock this afternoon. Golf Weekly is live from 2 o'clock. Then your State of the Union is coming your way at 3 o'clock. And a retro panel focusing on how far doping goes at 4 p.m. Then there's an OTB Gold with Michael Conlon at 6 p.m. speaking after the Rio Olympics. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. If you don't have the OTB Sports app already, you can go get it now. We're back on air tonight, by the way, when it comes to live stuff from 7 o'clock and on the radio. OTB AM is back live from 7:30 tomorrow. But we are leaving you with this morning. This is Oxford mathematician Joshua Bull, who was the overall winner of the 6 million odd players who took part in last year's Fantasy Premier League game. He won it, and he spoke to Sheahan and myself yesterday.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Okay, so what are we, 48 hours or so out on this Thursday morning from the start of a brand new Premier League season, which can mean only one thing. That is about 47 hours out from the deadline for your first Fantasy Premier League match week. Delighted to say we are joined by Joshua Bull. For Fantasy Premier League players, you will recognise his name from clicking into the overall standings last season, scrolling all the way up to the very top and noticing his name up at the very top all season to the point where he won FPL last year. Joshua, you're very welcome to the show.
Thanks for asking me on. Cheers.
The one thing that really struck me from particularly the last season of Fantasy Premier League is that we are now operating in an entirely different sphere to how we were 5-10 years ago. To see yourself up at the top there, somebody who was a part of the Oxford School of Maths, I think, to see Grandmaster Magnus Carlson up there, it definitely feels like a lot more people are investing a lot of their brains into FPL and winning this thing.
Yeah, so I do wonder how much of it is a kind of confirmation bias almost. You know, we see me as a mathematician and Magnus as a chess player, but there's a whole load of other people that are at the top of the table as well. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of them don't have a maths bone in their body.
Yeah, it definitely seems that is one thing that we look at now. And perhaps the easy thing to say is, oh, so we must start using statistics and we must start looking deep into the numbers and mining data to win this thing. But I'm sure from your perspective, it has been as much to do with the eye test as it is to do with stats.
So yeah, yes and no, I would say. So I'm not a big stats person, really, even though I'm a mathematician. I don't spend a lot of time kind of diving into really detailed kind of player comparisons. But at the same time, I'm not actually very good at football. So when it comes to like watching matches, I'm quite aware of my own weaknesses there, that like I'm not particularly good at actually watching a match and saying, oh, they look like a great fantasy football asset. But I think that actually really helped me, because it meant that when I started taking the game seriously, I was really trying to get a wide sample of opinions. So I would try and get as much information as possible from as many different people. And if 99% of people are all saying, oh, Jamie Vardy is looking like a great pick at the moment or something, that maybe means something different to if 50% of people are saying that, or if it's just a really small minority. So I think I was kind of crowdsourcing the eye test, if you like.
Who are you talking to?
There's some very active kind of online communities around fantasy football. So particularly on Reddit, there's an entire subreddit dedicated to Fantasy Premier League. And there's also a really active Twitter community. And there's a lot of kind of cross-pollination of ideas. So you do sometimes see the entire community seems to captain a Brighton defender or something, and everyone seems to think it's a good idea. And you have to kind of take a step back from that and say, well, how much of this is just a kind of bubble of what the people in this particular community are kind of saying among themselves, and how much of it is actually sensible?
That's really interesting, because one of those things you could add to that list is the fantasyfootballscout.co.uk message boards, which I guess if you log on there any Saturday morning, 0.5 of a second you're onto a new page. It is just a constant stream of information, to the point where these forums have become rather large, where bandwagons can almost develop in the conversations that occur in these forums. So how do you have those conversations while also encourage your own independent thinking to ensure that you are still being relatively differential with some of your picks?
Yeah, I think for me, getting that diversity is really key, and trying to look at every opinion and saying, is this a bubble? Is this a bandwagon, or is this actually something that, if I went and asked, one of my friends who's a really big fan of that club, would they recognise that as being a sensible thing, or would they say you're completely crazy? And I think just having that kind of critical eye, analysing the information that's coming in and being a bit critical of it, and not just taking it at face value, is really key to that. Because in hindsight, a lot of the people on these bandwagons say, what were we thinking captaining a Brighton defender in that double game week? That was, that sounds crazy. And when you take a step back, it feels like a bad idea. So I think if you're looking at someone on your team and you're thinking, hey, if I showed this to my friends, would they say, oh, you're completely mad? Or would they say, oh yeah, actually that could be a good choice?
Joshua, just to ask you, clearly, I know you say it's confirmation bias, and some of these things are down to luck as well. But the reality is, your Bulldozers team earned over 2,500 points last year, so we're going to mine you for any information we can get. Some people's policies are choose a few expensive players and stick with them. And I know I've seen you speaking before about how expensive is good. The more expensive a team is, the reality is, the better it does. So do you kind of move away from this idea of trying to spot a bargain player and trying to fill your team with as many expensive players as you can, I guess?
No, so I think there's a really important balance to hit there. So we kind of know, looking at the season ahead, who the players are that are going to score the most points. We don't know who's going to edge it, but it's a pretty safe bet that people like Mo Salah or Kevin De Bruyne will be up there. So we sort of know that those are the players we want in our teams, and those are probably the first players that everyone starts to look at, is who are the kind of premium picks that I can put in here. But the problem that you get is if you just try to load up with the most expensive players, then obviously you're left with cheap players that aren't necessarily even going to get any game minutes. So I think for me, there's a really important balance where I want to have just sort of one or two really expensive players that I know are going to do well, and I want to keep them in my team for the whole season and let the variance kind of work for me. So they might have a bad week when I'm not expecting them to, but they might have a good week when I'm expecting them to do badly. So I don't want to be switching them in and out all the time. But then at the same time, I think you need to find those kind of differential picks at the cheaper price points. And for me, it's much easier to find players around sort of 7-8 million that are going to score lots of points than it is to try and find those in the sort of 4 or 5 million mark. So I would say you're better off having fewer of the really big name players and having a much more balanced team. Having said that, different people do it completely differently. So.
Yeah, there are different methods, I guess. But one other thing that comes into it, and it's probably a little bit different this season, is the home and away balance. So I guess mathematics will tell us that generally home teams have a slight advantage. I know it's stranger this season with no fans for the start of the season anyway, but is that something you think about? Is that large part of your thinking when you look at fixtures and important players, that home advantage is a really crucial thing to think about?
Yeah, so it was something that I kind of had half an eye on last season. So since finishing the season, a lot of people have asked me about sort of the maths of fantasy football and whether I used maths. So I actually gave a public lecture for University of Oxford that I work for on Tuesday night, where I did a lot of these kind of mathematical analyses. And the really surprising one to me was how important that home form is. And actually there is a definite bump there. You are better off picking a home player. And I think that applies even when there's no fans, I would say, because there's all kinds of factors that go into why might a player be better off at home. Well, they live there for a start. They're not having to drive halfway across the country. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be a big problem that there's no fans in the stadium, other than for entertainment purposes. I think the home away difference will still be there.
That's very interesting. I guess what people are interested in as well is the metrics that you might use to actually determine who goes into your team. And I'm sure there are a multitude of them, but one of the things I've definitely seen more chat about over recent seasons has been your points per million. So, for example, your 4.5 defender from Crystal Palace getting a clean sheet is a far more valuable thing than Trent Alexander-Arnold getting a clean sheet. Do you break it down to point per million and actually decide for who is going to be the best value for your team when you're getting the most out of your 100 million at the start?
Yeah, so I definitely don't explicitly do that. Mm-hmm. I think the main problem with that is that you don't know how many points each player is going to score. Which seems like a really obvious thing to say, but if it was the case that we knew that at the start of the season, it would be easy to pick the best team. But obviously, what makes it an interesting game is that what people have done in the past doesn't necessarily reflect what they're going to do in the future. So I don't kind of explicitly calculate that sort of statistic, but it's definitely something in the back of my mind of, if I just pack my team with Salah and Aubameyang and Mane, that's getting very expensive. And I guess those are the trade-offs that most managers are probably thinking about. But I think just having an eye on it as a kind of slightly more explicit thing is probably useful.
It's not exactly advanced mathematics, but the price rises are probably as complex as you're going to get into when it comes to FPL. How close do you watch them? Are you on every single night is it FPLstatistics.com who keep an eye on them, seeing who's going up, who's going down, and it's a day-to-day thing?
Yeah, so right. I would say particularly at the start of last season, I definitely was.
Okay.
And I think there's a very clear link between having an expensive team, having a high team value, and having lots of points. But the question is, which way does that link run? And presumably, I don't think that just chasing team value is a good strategy. But I think if you get on players that are doing well, everyone buys them and your team value goes up. So it feels to me that the effect runs the other way round. It's not that you need the high team value in order to get the points, but you get the high team value from having points. That said, at the start particularly, it's probably a good indication of the types of player that are on the way up. So particularly when everyone has the same budget in week one, you don't want to get left behind on those team value changes. because you're very quickly going to find that you can't afford to bring in the players that you want to, the players that are really finding form. So particularly at the start of the season, I was paying a lot of attention and not making transfers because of the price changes. But I would say if there was a transfer I was thinking I was 75% likely to make, and I saw that the price change was going to happen, that would probably make me come to a decision on it much faster.
Clearly, the issue of captains is an important one, given the doubling of points for those players. And I've heard different people adopting the policy that, you know, there's no point in picking a captain that's worth less than, say, £8.59 million on fantasy. So is that a policy you adopt, that there's only a real point in picking a captain who is one of the more expensive players? Like, say, for example, Salah is at home this weekend. He's against one of the newly promoted teams in Leeds. So should captains be only the expensive players, do you think?
I think generally yes, to be honest. The reason for that being that you're expecting those expensive players to do better on average. That's why they're so expensive. So there will always be players like Danny Ings from last season, I think is a really good example, where he was priced well below that limit, and obviously was having a great season and price was going up, but he still wasn't above that kind of premium threshold. So that doesn't make him a bad captain choice. But if I was torn between him and somebody like Mo Salah, say, or Kevin De Bruyne with an equally good fixture, I would probably go for that expensive player, just because I'm expecting them to get more points in the long run. And you know, I think that's what you're looking for from the captain.
Just, you mentioned that the talk you gave online for Oxford yesterday, and I saw a clip from it, and it was quite interesting. I found that people maybe look at the shiny thing over there when they're trying to make transfers week in, week out, and they like to choose players who have played well the previous week and sign them up, rather than concentrate on getting rid of the underperforming players that they have. So do you think people should maybe take more of a focus on getting rid of the deadwood in their team, as opposed to trying to find the star players who've been playing well in the previous weeks? Yeah,
definitely. So that was something which really surprised me, just how stark the difference was when I made that model. It was really emphatic that you score better by getting rid of players that you think are underperforming, rather than bringing in players that you think are performing well. So that doesn't mean that you should just get rid of somebody and bring in somebody else that you don't particularly like the look of. But, you know, if there's a premium player that just scored a hat-trick and is worth 10 million, and there's a cheap midfielder that is in pretty good form, but like they're not going to be as explosive as that expensive player, but they're only 5 million. You're better off looking at your team and saying, well, the only player I've got here that's really underperforming is a 7 million midfielder. So rather than bring in that expensive replacement for somebody that I actually kind of want in my team anyway, I'll bring in the slightly worse value option, but that actually improves my team overall. So I think the main reason for that is because when you're looking at transfers, you want that player to sit in your team for some length of time. So you want them to be a player that's going to do well over the next few weeks. Whereas if you're just looking at a player's recent form and then saying, oh yeah, I need to bring them in, and you're comparing them with your premium choice that hasn't scored a hat-trick last week, well, all that's going to happen is that when it's, you know, if you're selling Mo Salah to bring in Kevin De Bruyne, well, immediately what will happen is Mo Salah will get his hat-trick and Kevin De Bruyne will blank, and you'll think, oh, I should have left it there.
For sure. It's points chasing, and it rarely works out too well. But what I find very interesting here is that your way of thinking is just a really logical way of thinking about fantasy football. You almost have a philosophy when it comes to fantasy football that is very clear and rigid, and your thought process seems to be consistent every week. Like I assume I'm correct in saying that, whereas some people might say somebody involved in the Oxford School of Maths won Fantasy Premier League must have had all the statistics to his hand. But it seems that it's logic as much as anything else.
Yeah, I think, I don't know how well I actually did at sticking rigidly to that philosophy.
Can you give us examples on that?
Yeah, I guess, probably the best example of that is Jamie Vardy, who I had a feeling from the start of the season that he was going to do well. So he was in my team early on, which was great when he started doing well, you know. But then actually I held on to him all the way through that goal drought that he had. And really, if I was being kind of a bit more clinical about it, I would have said, well, actually his form has really, really dropped. And at the moment, he's the deadwood in that team. And he's the player that I should be transferring out to bring in someone else. Whereas I kind of had him in my head in the other category of, oh, well, he's a premium player. He's going to bang in the goals next week. Oh, it'll be next week. So yeah, I think there I was kind of looking at him a bit too fondly in terms of what he'd done for me early on in the season.
That's very interesting. What was the most heart-stopping moment in winning FPL 2019-2020?
Oh, that's a good question. I think so. On the last day, I was kind of in and around the kind of top 3 or 4, and so I knew that I had a chance to win it from there. And I went off. I actually went for a run, so I completely missed the first half. You know, I made my transfers, looked at all the team news, and thought, right, yeah, I need to go out. So I went off for a long run. Came back at half time, and I was staying with my family at the time, and they just kind of said like, "Oh, have you seen what's happened? You know, have you seen what's going on?" And at half time, all of the results were going in my favour, and it was just like I had a real moment of like, wait, this could actually, you know, could actually come off. Yeah, and then yeah, I mean, there was a lot of chaos around the actual, you know, ending, as I'm sure you know. But yeah, that was a very stressful run that I was on, I think.
The chaos around the ending was incredible. For people who aren't familiar with what happened, what did happen?
Yeah, so I was ahead at half time, and by the time we got to 90 minutes, Kevin De Bruyne had just gone and scored every goal in the world. And the guy who was a few places below me going into the week had skyrocketed ahead. So I finished with the second most points. And I was pretty happy with that. I kind of had not been expecting to get anywhere near the prizes. So it was just kind of like, yeah, brilliant. It's a great story. And then I just kind of didn't hear anything for 2 or 3 weeks. And, you know, I had kind of was moving on and sort of like looking to other things, I guess. And then I just got an email from the Premier League saying that he'd been disqualified and that they were going to announce me as the champion, which was just really unexpected.
Did we ever get to the bottom of why that happened? What was the disqualification for?
So we never quite got to the bottom of it. No. So because all that the Premier League have said is that he broke the terms and conditions. There's a lot of rumours flying around Twitter, and he's released a couple of videos which basically says he made some comments in a private chat which got sent to the Premier League, and they disqualified him because of those. But yeah, it's just a bad situation all round, I think.
Well, I guess, you know, there has to be somebody who benefits from it. And I guess, you know, finishing in the top 2 in Fantasy Premier League is still an outrageous achievement, but to win it obviously is incredible. The question that everybody wants answered today, Joshua, is how is your Game Week 1 team looking, and what is your logical part of your brain telling you ahead of this season?
Let me get the pen and paper out here first, Owen. Quick, go on.
Yeah, I'm very much not decided yet, which is, you know, I think I won't be happy with it until the deadlines pass, and even then I might not be happy, because there's so many choices that feel like very important. You know, do I have even just stuff like looking at my midfield? If I've got 14 million to spend on 2 players, do I go for 2 that are kind of equally priced, or do I get 1 really expensive player and 1 really cheap player? And those, you know, I'm trying to break it down to all of these small decisions. You know, what do I want to do about these 2 particular players where I want them both, but I can only have 1? Okay, like I'll try and break it down, make that decision, and then move on. But the problem is you then end up with a draft, and I'm just optimizing and changing it all the time. So yeah, I know that there are going to be players that I've had in my draft who I really wish that I'd left in there after week one, because I've had all of the players by now. So
yeah, like the positional changes obviously is great. It's also really difficult because it has loosened up so many more, like essentially 2 more forward positions for what might turn out to be probably the cheapest set of forwards we'll ever have going into a game week 1 of a fantasy Premier League season. Specifically talking here, do you think you're going to go into game week 1 with Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and Mo Salah in your team, thereby using up a massive chunk in your budget into midfield positions? Yeah,
I think I probably will. So when I'm looking at those really expensive midfielders, I would love to have all of them. And I think in many ways the choice this year is a lot less important than it has been previously, because I think that it's so well balanced. For me, I think that the people, probably the 3 players from that midfield that I expect to be at the top of the points list are Salah, KDB and Aubameyang. And I can't look past Salah and Kevin De Bruyne. I think they're the ones that I'm going to end up going with. But of course, with this blank game week 1, it all throws a whole load of other questions out there. Joshua, so I think Aubameyang to KDB is going to be a popular move.
For sure.
Is your subs bench generally, would your subs bench be 4.5 million players? Do you have some decent players on your bench? Do you like to have the bulk of your expense and your budget in that starting 11, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, so I want the best of both worlds, right? I want the cheapest possible players on my bench, but I do want them to get some game time. And I don't really mind, even if they're only coming on for half an hour, as long as they can get me something. Because if they're coming on, it's because something's gone wrong in my team selection anyway. So I'm just looking for any sort of consolation from that. That was quite easy last year because there were players like Lundstrom and Dendoncker that from the start we knew they were at the bottom of the price range, but they were going to play. Whereas this year there isn't really that. It's a lot harder to find bench players that are actually going to get any points. So I'm really having a dilemma with it. I don't want to leave any money on my bench, but I feel like I'm going to have to, because particularly with coronavirus, I think there might well be players getting quarantined that we're not expecting. That bench might turn out to be a lot more important. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It's going to be a strange all year. I think a lot of people are going to be wildcarding quite early this season as well, not least because of that blank game week 1. And as you say, the temptation to go Aubameyang to Kevin De Bruyne after game week 1, as you say, to chase those points after Aubameyang may have had an average performance in game week 1. A lot of people might avoid that and actually end up going for their Manchester players later on after about 4 or 5 weeks with a wildcard. It's going to be very interesting either way, Joshua. I wish you the very best with Fantasy Premier League this year. The pressure is slightly on. You've set the bar fairly high last year. Best of luck with it, and we'll chat to you again soon.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.